Oh, folks, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, as the song always goes. Although I'm not going to sing it to you because you'd all be crying. I'm a very talented person in a lot of respects. Singing is not one of them, okay? That's one of my shortcomings. I have to admit that to the umpteenth degree, so I'm not going to sing it. Folks, how are we feeling?
Well...
Feel pretty good after taking the practice final. I did want to kind of annoy you with some questions that I had on there, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me see. So it was question, I have a few of them, but the first one was on question 18.
Okay. I will simultaneously pull up the practice final.
Yep. No rush.
Practice final. So many tests I gotta find. Okay, 18.
Yeah, 18.
Okay. Math question.
Yeah, that was just one of them. It was that one and then number 20. It just, yeah, a little... I didn't quite know where to start with those. Like, I remember most of the math, but those two kind of had me drawing a blank, but...
For sure.
Yeah, I guess I just forgot.
Yeah, no worries. Let's go over them real quick, and then we'll kind of like answer any random questions, and then we'll do like a formal recap review, because, you know, we got a decent time to do it. So, this one, an appraiser is using the cost approach to determine the value of a hospital. She uses comparable properties to decide that a similar plot of land is worth $750,000. She then utilizes the comparative unit method to calculate that the cost of rebuilding a 36,000 square foot hospital would be $250 per square foot. At the same time, she calculated a depreciation percentage of 25% using the market extraction approach. What a gross question. According to the appraiser, what is the property's value? Yeah,
That's your question, right? You made that question.
No, not all of these are my questions. Some of these were recycled whenever I took over as the director of the school.
I'll take back what I said about you then.
Yeah, no, this is a disgusting question. This is absolutely gross and abhorrent. I did not write this one. I didn't remove it because arguably, you know, you could see stuff like this, but it's not mine, okay? So, like, when you see the really bad, like, it's not necessarily mine. You got to ask me first. Let's just see if we can kind of facilitate this. First and foremost, it's a cost approach question. So, remember, in a cost approach, we take the land separately, and then of course we look at what the building is brand new minus depreciation. And so similar plot of land is worth $750,000, and so we can keep the land separate over here because the land doesn't depreciate. Let me get my calculator out here. Utilizes rebuilding the 36,000 square foot hospital at $250 per square feet, or I'm sorry, $250 per square foot. And so what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, at $250 a square foot times your 36,000 square foot building, it would cost $9 million to build this building brand new. But then they used one of these abstract approaches, and this is thankfully not even a question where you need to understand what they're talking about. You just need to know calculated a depreciation percentage of 25%. Well, that means that we're depreciating it by 25% of that. So really all you have to do is times this by 0.75 to see what's left. Oops, 0.75. So 75% should be $6,750,000. Add back in the value of the land, $750,000, $7,500,000. So like it's a gross question, but I mean it seems a little scarier than it actually is. Does that make sense how I just did that?
Yeah, so instead of doing times 25%, you just did the other way, 75.
You could do times 25%, but remember that's to subtract out from 9 million. So if you went that way, it would be
faster to do 75.
that's right. Because if we know that we're losing that much, what's left after that, 75%. But you could have also done 9 million times the 25% depreciation and subtracted that out of the 9 million, and you would have gotten the same answer. I just cut out a step because I'm, more comfortable with this style of math. But yeah,
I gotcha.
Yeah, but that makes sense.
It does now. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What was the other one? And then I'll get some of these other questions.
The next one's a big one. It was a number. Let me see. Number 20. Yeah, I did not like this one.
Oh, God. This is, folks, let's go over it because this is something you can and will see on your final exam. Maybe not to this extent. And then, Caleb, are you just going to ask about another question or are you asking about the previous one? Because I don't want to.
I'm not going to lie. This is the second day in a row I've done this. I had no clue my hand was raised.
Oh, okay. Well, that's... You might have the settings where, like, if you do this, like, it'll go up and maybe you're, like, stretching. Because some people have settings where, like, you do that and it'll just automatically appear. No worries, man. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to mess you up there.
No, you're good.
So, folks, this is... Well, and I'm just going to skip forward and we're just going to say what the actual question is, okay? What is the cash due from the buyer at settlement? And so remember when we talked about the closing a sales transaction kind of stuff, this is what I told you would be faced with. A list of different items, and you would ultimately have to answer about the buyer or the seller. Either what the buyer has to bring to closing or what the seller is going to walk away with at closing. And so this is how much the buyer has to bring. So ultimately, you have to first realize you're only focusing on the buyer. And then we're going to focus on the buyer's debits and the buyer's credits. And then you just got to start piecing the information in little by little. Buyer contracted to buy a home for $520,000. That's going to be purchase price of $520,000. Debit to the buyer. We'll pay $4,200 in closing costs. Well, that typically is not how we give it to you, but of course that would be another debit on top of, so $4,200 in closing costs. The buyer has already paid outside of closing $450 for the appraisal, $75 for the credit report. That's not going to change our numbers at all. Those had to be paid, so ignore that. The buyer has obtained a loan for 80% of the home's purchase price. Okay. Well, loan to value ratio, purchase price of $520,000 times your 80% loan to value ratio gives you a loan amount of $416,000. Now that is a credit because the bank is giving you that money. Yes, you'll have to pay it back later, but not at closing. Everybody still with me so far? Okay. Next thing, as we go down, loan amount of 80% of the home's purchase price, interest rate of 6.15%. We're going to need that if they ask for interim interest, so let's hold that thought. It's going to close on June 30th. We need that for proration. Annual property tax on the home will be unpaid as of the settlement date and will be paid later in the year by the buyer. Okay, well, then we need to do something with that. So the property taxes are $6,264 a year. And the buyer is going to be paying that full amount later in the year. So we need to figure out what is the seller's portion. And the seller's responsible for January 1 up to and including the day of closing, June 30th. And so what we would do is we would take our annual amount, $6,264. And this did say that we're using a 30-day, 360-day, right, method. So divide it by 360 days to get what we call your per diem for the taxes. I'm going to put that up here. $1,740 a day. And then because this is the 30-day method, there's January, February, March, April, May, closing on June 30th. But technically June 30th means that these are all 30-day months because we give the seller a day of closing. So how many days is the seller responsible for? 6 times 30. 6 full months. 180 days. 180 days times the $1,740 a day. Seller's portion would be $3,132. Now, that would be a debit from the seller, credit to the buyer. And so since we're not looking at the seller side, you just need to make sure that you give the credit to the buyer, because ultimately they will be paying the full tax bill sometime later in the year. So $3,132 for tax prorations. Everybody okay with what I just did there and how I calculated it? Okay. Next step, the $2,200 annual hazard insurance premium for the first year was paid outside of settlement. Okay, well then we don't need to do anything there if it's paid outside. At settlement, the lender collected interim interest on the buyer's loan and loan escrow account deposits for it. So let's do the interim interest. The interim interest is the hardest one for pre-licensing students because we just go over it so briefly and it's such a pain in the butt. So remember, anytime we're doing any loan stuff calculations, it is always based on the loan amount. Folks, what's the loan amount?
$416,000.
$416,000, not the purchase price, right? The $416,000 loan amount. This is where you got to go back to your interest rate of 6.15. So remember, if you're not good with percentages, let the calculator convert it for you. Times 6.15%. That would be annual interest of $25,584. But we're not charging them for annual interest. We're charging them for daily interest. Divided by 360 days in the year, which means they would have to pay $71.07 a day. Now, folks, here's the crazy thing. The interim interest only stays in the month that you closed in. You're closing on the 30th. That means you're only paying 1 day. They lent you the money the 30th. They said pay interest for the 30th. Because when July rolls around, they will get July's interest when?
August.
August 1st payment. Everybody okay with that? Now, this is a loan cost, and so this is a buyer debit. $71.07, and we'll call this II, interim interest. Okay, let's see what else is on here. The lender collected interim interest. Loan escrow deposits for 11 months property taxes. Okay, they want 11 months worth of property taxes. Folks, don't overcomplicate this. Annual tax bill, go back to it, $6,264, and they want you to have a reserve of 11 months worth of the full tax bill. And so that would be your full tax bill divided by 12 months in the year to figure out how much you need for per month times 11. So that's going to be a debit going to open your escrows of $5,742 for tax escrows. Next one they want is 2 months of hazard insurance. Now, hazard insurance is not going to be on here as a whole because it's paid outside of closing. First year is paid outside of closing, but it's $2,200 a year. $2,200 divided by 12, and they want 2 months. So times 2, that would be a debit of $366.67. And oops, I didn't write it. We'll call that insurance escrows, just so I can keep myself straight here. And then if the seller owns the day of settlement and you're using the 360-day method, what does the cash due rounded to the nearest dollar? So this should be everything. So now we look at our credits and our debits. So debits of, well, let's do credits first. 416,000 plus 3,132 would be total credits of 419,132. And then we take a look at our total debits. 520,000 plus 4,200 plus 7,107 plus 5,742 plus 366.67. So there's your total debits, and I'll write them down, but then I can just use it in the calculator. 530,379.74. and then subtract out your total credits, things that have already been paid for you. 419,132 should leave you with cash to close 111,248, because we said rounded to the nearest dollar. It's ridiculous how easy this crap is for me, isn't it? I know.
This might be one this might be one I just take the L on, not gonna lie.
I feel like these are gonna take up my whole test time. Like when I see these, they're so intimidating. I'm like, this is gonna take me 2 hours.
If it makes you feel better,
By the time I'm done, it'll be done.
it's at the very end of your test, because I know that about people. It's at the very end of the test. All the math is at the end. Okay, there's like 1 or 2 questions in between it, but there's like the 8 math questions are basically in the last 10 at least. They're kind of just grouped in the very end of it for you. So there's that. So, yeah. Yeah, that's a cumbersome one. I mean, my hand kind of went a little numb from like writing all that crap out with a mouse. Okay, let's just call it what it is.
What do you have? I'm like, do you have like a little like pad, but you're using a mouse? Oh my God.
That's why, listen, my handwriting is terrible in real life, Cheyenne. It's even worse when you're like doing a mouse, okay? Like even with a pen, my handwriting's terrible. But that's why it looks so bad up here, because it's crazy because my laptop's a touchscreen and I have like a smart pen, but it wobbles so much. So like I would literally have to have my laptop down here to write on it, and that's just, it's not worth all that effort. So I've just learned over the years of teaching to write with a mouse. Yeah. There you go. Does that answer your question, Constantine?
It does. Will I remember it, though? Probably not.
I mean, you know, give it a good old college try, I reckon. With time allowing it.
I'll try my best.
There you go.
There was one that I, by some miracle, guessed correctly on the test. I'll get to that later. But yeah, no, thanks for at least going over it.
Sure.
The next one I had is not as crazy as this one. It was number 22.
Okay.
I just had a quick question. Because they want to know which is not considered a fixture. And D, like, makes sense. But I also want to know how A is not considered a... how A is considered a fixture.
Because it is specifically referencing the offer to purchase and contract standard form 2T. And everything listed on this, oops, too far, list is a fixture per the 2T. And so right here, swimming pools, spas, hot tubs. It is specifically referencing this list, not the nailed, screwed, glued, or buried jazz that, you know, is like kind of the national default, but this is on the specific 2T that it's referencing. So this is, if you go back to it, this shed also is. It is literally specifying solar panels on the garage roof. Those are attached, and so that would be included. Garden plants and pots in the sides of yards. And so if you go back to it once again, landscape and outdoor trees and plants except in movable containers. So it is specifically referencing this list, and that's why it says very specifically the 2T.
Gotcha, yeah, and that one seems pretty straightforward, but yeah, I just forgot why hot tub was considered one, but okay.
Not considered, or well, is one, yes. And so the only one not considered one is the garden pots, yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Last question is, I don't want to hog up all the questions here. On question 36, I was just a little bit confused on this one. I'll wait till you get there.
Yeah.
So, I honestly wasn't quite sure what to choose. I just kind of guessed B because it kind of sounded like it made the most sense. Because I could have sworn, like, the answer was obviously D, but I could have sworn that you told us that a BIC could not be in a designated dual agency with a provisional broker. Because, like, the provisional broker would, like, get destroyed.
Remember, though, the example I gave you.
So you can if they're in another office, right?
There you go. So in that specific question, it's talking about 2 different offices. Oh no.
Okay.
And so let me just give you the visual to help you remember this. This number right here is a firm license number. And so this is Coldwell Banker, Howard Perry, and Walston. All of these are Coldwell Banker, Howard Perry, and Walston. If any of these offices, any brokers within these offices do deals with each other, it's dual agency. But the rule is that a broker in charge cannot do designated dual agency against their provisional broker. So if you were to look at this gentleman right here, or whichever one I can click first, there you go, and you look at the licensees, Samantha McCoy could not do designated dual agency against Mitchell, could not do designated dual agency against Jolene, Zanita, or otherwise. But Zanita could do designated dual agency against Glenn Weeks because Glenn Weeks is not her BIC. He is a BIC, but not her BIC. That's the distinction there. And so in this one, a provisional broker may be designated agent for the seller client, and a BIC from another branch office, still the same firm, may be the designated agent for the buyer client, because that is not breaking the rule. It's not their BIC. Yes, they BIC, but not their BIC.
Okay, gotcha. I just totally forgot about that rule. But that makes sense.
Yep.
Anyway, that's all I got for now. I don't want to take up all the questions, so.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Folks, any other miscellaneous questions while I got this stuff pulled up before we go into formal review territory?
I have a foolish question.
Okay.
Number 32.
On this?
Yeah, I messed it up, and I think it's from my reading, because it said what is not a category of material facts. And but I thought you were supposed to tell properties prior issues, so I think the wording has me.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Which of the following is not a category of material facts that must be disclosed to all parties in a transaction? Now, this is specifically referencing the four that are outlined in the License on Commission Rulebook. And so the four that are outlined, facts about the property itself, facts relating directly to the property, any fact in regard to the ability of the principal to complete the transaction, and then any fact known to be of special importance to your party. Facts about the property's prior use is not one of the four, and ergo that's the one that sticks out like a sore thumb. Furthermore, consequential prior uses may be a material fact, but if it was a daycare, that's not a material fact. Nobody needs to know that. Nobody cares that it was a daycare. If it was a toxic waste dump, that would be a material fact. Does that make sense?
It does, but I mean, I was under the assumption that you kind of want to know the history of the, can you know the history? Yeah, how far back does material facts go?
Sure. And here's where I got to caution y'all again when you're taking the test. You've got to look for some obvious things to help you pick the best answer. Under the right circumstances, Camilla, are you correct that prior uses could maybe be material fact? But once you realize that these three right here are specifically referencing 3 out of the 4 named categories in the License Law and Commission Rulebook, this one is not. And so that's obviously the answer that stands out like a sore thumb and going to be your best answer. And remember, when we're dealing with, and I'll just pull it up real quick too, because we're, doing all this review anyway. The best place to review this stuff is down in the comments section. Remember that comment section I told you from day one is important. So if you look right here, material facts, these 4. Facts about the property itself, facts relating directly to the property, facts relating directly to the ability of the agent's principal to complete the transaction, and facts that are known to be of special importance to a party. That's what they're referencing. And remember I told you, if I was the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, I would probably have incorporated a lot of stuff from my comment section onto my licensing exam. I mean, I'm not the commission, so I mean, there's some in my exam, but I'm saying for theirs. Yeah.
Okay.
Any others you want to throw in the mix?
again, I know this is silly, but this is one of the things that keeps messing me up. So I'm assuming it will probably mess others up. It's number 67.
Uh-huh.
Is that right? Did I say that right? Yes.
67.
Yeah, just double checking my notes. It's that expiration date thing. It's the termination of agency agreement. So again, it's just one of those, my brain is not working when, you know, what cancels which agreement, I guess.
Camilla, we gonna have to start that brain, girl. Okay, because listen, I know, no, you're asking excellent questions. I'm just saying, right? Like, you just make sure it's working for the test. That's gonna be very important. Remember when we're talking about, you know, contracts? Well, certain things kill all contracts, and then certain things are different depending on if we're talking about agency contracts or sales contracts. So this is specifically talking about an agency agreement. Well, and you're only looking at the one that would terminate an agency agreement. Remember, agency agreements have to have an expiration date, a definitive end date. And so if we have not fulfilled the purpose by that end date, it will always die then. Remember when we looked at the listing agreement, the buyer agency agreement, it says runs through the effective date and ends on at 11:59 p.m. on the expiration date. So if we've done nothing and we've not done our job, it will die then. If the buyer loses financing, that doesn't automatically terminate our buyer agency agreement. Right. Personality conflicts between buyer and the client, nope. Or I'm sorry, the buyer and the agent, doesn't automatically terminate it. And the client cannot attend a scheduled showing. Yet again, no automatic termination on any of those. Now, if they don't show up for showings, could they be in breach and we pursue terminating the contract? Sure. If they're losing financing, are we potentially going to allow them out of the contract? Sure. But none of these things automatically terminate it. They're not powerful enough. Expiration date will always kill it. Mutual agreement will always kill it. Destruction of the property will never kill a buyer agency agreement, but destruction of the property would kill a listing agreement and a property management agreement. Operation of law could kill agency agreements, right? Eminent domain, bankruptcy, foreclosures, you know, for the property specific ones yet again. So you just got to make sure you're very intentfully looking at the ones that absolutely would.
Yeah. Just unlearn my daily life and then just do this.
Didn't I say that on day one? I said, don't you dare bring your personal life into this. Answer the test based on what came out of here. You can't do it based on past experiences, your life as a real estate broker and anywhere else or anything like that. Okay, what your agent did and didn't do, what you do and don't do, you got to base it off of the laws and the rules. Any other miscellaneous questions before we get into more formal territory?
I have a question.
Anybody but McKinney. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. I'm kidding.
It's from the midterm. I retook it, and I just want to work through like why I might have missed it, and I think it's very obvious, but it's number 27.
On the midterm?
On the midterm.
I don't think it likes the fact that I have multiple logins simultaneously. Midterm. What number? Oh, you're muted back, McKinney.
Oh, sorry, 27.
27.
I was talking more after that.
Oh, yeah, well, I was not being rude and not answering. You were just muted.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I just think it might be because what maybe is getting me is that they're an independent contractor affiliated with a real estate brokerage. And I think that's where I got confused.
Oh, sure. Let's talk about this. If a real estate licensee is an independent contractor affiliated with a real estate brokerage firm, the licensee is solely responsible for all of the following except, well, number one, let me give you a test taking strategy while we're talking about this. Remember, I told you these are Boolean style questions, which means that you're looking for the one outlier. 3 of these things are alike and one is different. Now, you were looking for the one that's not true, the except. Now, the independent contractor thing means we are not an employee. But you have to remember that because we have teamed up with this brokerage firm, if we are hired by a buyer to be their buyer's agent, who is actually the buyer's agent?
The firm.
The firm. Okay, so now let's answer this question. As an individual who is not an employee, am I responsible for paying my local, state, and federal income taxes on my own? Yes. Am I responsible for determining my daily and weekly work hours? Yes, because I'm not being paid as an employee. I work when I want. That's the perk of the job. Am I solely responsible for choosing how to meet my yearly business goals? Yes, because my firm may assist in that. They may want to be a part of that. But at the end of the day, even if they say, Seth, we want you to sell $7 million this year, I'm like, nah, I'll maybe do 2 deals this year. I'm just going to go on vacation a lot. I make that decision. But if we screw up and violate license laws or commission rules, who has also violated license laws and commission rules?
Gotcha, the firm.
The firm.
I chose D, and I think it was because I was thinking from like being a BIC, being in charge of these people, that they would have those conversations. So I think that's why I got confused. And
we do have those conversations with our firm, but they still can't force us to do anything, right? I mean, I want my kids to eat vegetables. I can't really force it aside from like shoving them down their throats. I'm sure, when I was in sales, my BICs probably wanted me to do more cold calling. I didn't do it. I run my own business. They don't tell me how to live my life as McKinney. All right? I'm a grown man. That's the perk of getting a real estate license. You do what you want to do.
You're a big boy.
That's right. Thank you, Michael. I'm a big boy. You can't make me eat my vegetables or do my cold calling or whatever it is. There you go. Sometimes you just got to hear it explained in that way. Yeah. Any other miscellaneous ones while we're here? Well, then, I'm just going to start talking at you and telling you some stuff, and then we'll kind of figure out where to go from there. Okay, let's talk about some formal review. Please understand that we are wrapping up a pre-licensing class. And your first hurdle is, of course, my test. But I am not focusing on my test. Sure, I could teach you every single thing that you were going to see on my test right here, right now, but that's not going to do you any good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on all the testable material and all the things you need to know from a North Carolina pre-licensing course point of view. So let me start with some of the obvious things that I'm just going to remind you of. Folks, throughout this entire curriculum, we have been following along with this 2023 syllabus. Now, this syllabus has a certain flow, and that's how we've kind of operated the course. Now, there is a new syllabus, a 2024 syllabus, and I haven't really focused on it. Why? Because it doesn't really flow in any practical way. So let me explain a couple things. This still includes everything that is deemed to be testable on the 2023 syllabus. But when you are dealing with the North Carolina Real Estate Licensing Exam, remember we've got this RELINK book. This is how you apply for a license. This is things you need to be aware of. This is where you find your background check. And some of you have asked this question, and I've reminded you, but this is where you see, not mine, although I will tell you that I tried to kind of emulate this to the best of my ability. It's not perfect, but the state licensing testing criteria. And so what that means is after you get through my test, this is what you're going to be faced with. Here is the breakdown. From a national point of view, real property, they have 9 questions. Ownership, 8 questions. Valuation, 11 questions. Contracts and agency, 16. Real estate practice, 14. Property disclosures, 8. Financing, 7. Real estate math, 7. That is your structure of your national portion of your exam. On the state exam, there are some duplicates because there are some similar categories. Licensure 3, agency 16, supervision/compensation 4, brokerage practice 12, taxes and insurance 4, contracts and closing 7, landlord and tenant 3, other North Carolina laws 11. Now folks, let's be completely honest. As much as there are categories here, there are so many topics that we talked about. We would be very hard-pressed to figure out exactly what they're testing on in each of those categories. And that is where this other syllabus comes into play. if you look at the actual 2024 syllabus, it is solely in existence to tell you what types of questions you could see in each testable category. So here are the categories as outlined in the 2024 syllabus. This is all the total categories, and some of them are national, some of them are state. And so when you get in there, they will show you what they're potentially testing you on. So if y'all are okay with it, I'm just going to start on these categories and start rehashing some of the most testable things throughout these individual categories, and stop me at any time and we will make sure that we review anything else that you want to talk about. So as we scroll down to licensure, you will see that licensure has 3 questions specifically on the North Carolina portion of the exam. Now, we've talked about a lot of the licensure stuff. Of course, the licensing process, taking a 75-hour minimum pre-licensing course, filling out the application, having the requisite character, doing the background check. All of these things are things we kind of discussed on day 1 with the Relink book that we just kind of pointed out. Of course, the testing provider is Pearson VUE. The test is 80 questions on the national, 60 questions on the state portion. It is a bifurcated exam. As we go on, here's where you get into some of the other things. Notice the level 2. Level 2 are the ones that you need to know a little bit more. License qualification requirements. And so when do you need a license? We've been teaching that from day 1. Remember the LL Beans activities. If you list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell, offer to do those things, refer to do those things, or do them, and it deals with real property for others for compensation, a license is required. Now, of course, we've been talking about the licensing categories. When you get a broker's license, there's just the one broker's license as we talked about yesterday. It is this, but there are different statuses for the broker's license. And you do need to know the differentiation between provisional, full broker, also called a non-provisional, also just called a broker, BIC eligible, and BIC. Those are all broker's licenses, just on different statuses. Then there's even more statuses. Active versus inactive, current versus expired. And you do need to know when you can be this, that, or the other. Folks, how do you move from provisional broker to full broker?
Finding yourself a broker in charge.
Post license.
Post licensing.
Oh, wait, that's right. Oh.
Yeah, you got to be careful. That's why we're doing this review. You move from a provisional broker to a full broker by taking 3 30-hour post-licensing courses. Folks, I'm going to remind you again, would it be reasonable to say that you could arguably become a full broker without ever affiliating with a BIC, without ever doing any real estate brokerage, and within about 3 weeks, really and truthfully? Is that a true statement?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, yeah.
You could. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but if I ask you on the test, can you do this? The answer is yes. Okay? So let's say that you're not a full broker, you're just a provisional broker. How do you activate your license as a provisional broker?
Yeah,
That's going to work for
Okay,
me.
with it.
I'm going to go with the same answer I said earlier.
There you go. Let's go with the same answer you said earlier. You have to affiliate with a broker in charge. Okay? That is how you can activate your license as a provisional broker. Folks, it is impossible to do any brokerage activity as a PB unless you have a broker in charge. Okay? Well, let me add another tier onto this. When you take your 3 30-hour post-licensing courses, and let's say that you've been on inactive status this entire time, well, when you complete the last class, your new status will be what?
Provisional, inactive.
When you complete the last post-licensing class,
You'll be a broker.
correct, also called
Non-provisional.
non-provisional, also just called full broker. Okay, so when you become a full broker, folks, please understand that you get your license on inactive status as a PB, you take your classes, and you become a full broker. You do not automatically activate. Go ahead and accept that right now. You're still an inactive full broker, but you are a full broker. Everybody okay with that statement? Okay. What are your options? As a full broker, you decide you want to have an active license. What are your options?
You can associate with a BIC.
You can-
Proprietor.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one McKinney said. You can affiliate with a firm and a broker in charge and activate your license that way. Absolutely, you can, even as a full broker. Now, what was the other one you were saying, Rob?
You could be a sole proprietor.
You can be a sole proprietor. So what you're telling me is, as a full broker who has never done brokerage experience, who has taken their post licensing and they're not active, they could elect to activate their license and operate as an independent sole proprietor. Is that what we're saying?
Right.
Yes. And that is 1,000% correct. Now, folks, what can they not do? Advertise,
Accounts,
trust funds,
trust accounts,
trust accounts.
no affiliation with other brokers.
and no affiliating other brokers, right? Specifically, they can't affiliate other brokers. They could affiliate, but they can't affiliate other brokers. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Can they do real estate transactions?
Yes.
Yes. Because they are an active broker. Can they be paid for real estate transactions?
Yes.
Yes. As long as you are active as a broker, you can, in that status, help unsolicited buyers, and you can collect referral fees. And remember, the referral fees, if you're not affiliated with a firm, who are those checks going to be made directly out to? Tara said, me. Got to pass the test first, Tara, but yeah, you, the broker. It's going to come directly to you. Now, let's just go ahead and add this other study thing in the mix. Folks, if you are affiliated with a firm, who do the checks need to go to?
The firm.
The firm, the BIC. Okay, all monies have to pass through the firm. Whether you be a full broker or a provisional broker, if you have a firm, all monies in North Carolina need to pass through the firm before they go to you. But as an independent sole proprietor, lawfully doing brokerage, not advertising, not having trust accounts, and not affiliating other brokers, you can be paid directly for your referral fees and any buyers you help that are unsolicited. Everybody okay with that statement? Okay. Well, when you get your license, when do you have to start taking CE?
On June 10th.
In your second year of...
Oh, right, yeah.
There you go. So let's combine those together. You do not have to start taking CE until you have renewed your license once. In other words, you have to get it done before your second renewal or in your second renewal year. So if you got your license issued on July 1 of 2024, your CE would not be required until when?
26.
Right, because if you get your license issued on July 1 of this year, you will be issued a license in the 2024-2025 licensing year, which means your first renewal will be before June 30th of 2025. And that means that your second renewal will be before June 30th of 2026. And you have to complete it prior to your second renewal, or in other words, in your second renewal year. So you will not need it until June 10th of 2026. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
What if I decided to... You said that if I call the North Carolina Real Estate Commission to get my license now, and then I do have to pay my renewal for this year, does that still apply?
Oh, yeah. Well, the rule applies, but you'll have just shot yourself in the foot. So if you call the commission, let's say that you pass my test next week, and you call the commission, and they issue your license on June 20th, they're going to say, here's your license, pay us $45 for your new renewal fee, and then that means that on July 1st, you will be in your second renewal year already, and you will need to get your CE done by June 10th of 2025.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, it's very specific. There is no prorations on the renewal. So if you call and beg for your license in June, you've got to turn around and renew it immediately after you got it. Yeah. So if you don't get your education, your CE, done by what date again?
June 10th.
June 10th. If you do not get your CE done by June 10th, what will happen to your license?
Inactive.
It will go inactive.
Current inactive.
When?
June 30th.
June 30th at midnight. Or June 1st.
Just say July 1st. You're right. Technically, it's at midnight, but midnight starts July 1st. You will go inactive on July 1st, okay? Now, if you've paid your dues, say it again, Constantine. What would be your status if that happens to you, but you did pay your dues?
You would be a current inactive.
Current and inactive broker. Everybody okay with that? You paid your dues, your currency keeps you current, but you had an education deficiency which made you inactive. So you would be current but inactive. Can you do real estate brokerage?
No.
No. You can only do real estate brokerage as a current and active licensee. Here's the other question. How do you fix your education deficiency? You missed your 8 hours of classes. How do you fix it?
You do your 8 hours of classes.
Need a little bit more than that, actually. So let's talk about this.
Don't you do more class time?
So here's what they say. They say, you done messed up, AA Ron. We can't rely on you to take crap on time anymore. So here's what they say to you. Now that you're in a new licensing year, go ahead and take this New Year's update and a 4-hour elective for this year, and then take 2 4-hour electives to make up for the 8 hours you missed last year. Because the update course is only taught in 1 licensing year. We don't teach them anymore. Folks, in 5 days from now, today is June 5th, in 5 days from now, I will never teach the update class that I've taught over 1,000 times this year ever again. It's gone, okay? So you would have to take 16 hours of education, the New Year's update, in 3 elective classes totaling 16 hours, and then activation is not automatic. You would have to reaffiliate with your firm and have them reactivate your license using Form 2.08, or if you're an independent sole proprietor, reactivate your own license using Form 2.08.
Sounds like a lot of trouble.
It is a lot of trouble. And folks, just before I entered in this class with you today, I was teaching BIC up. I had 32 BICs taken at 5 days before the deadline. Yeah, but I mean, all my other classes have been like 100 and something. So I mean, I guess 32 is not too terrible, but you know, yeah, I know. So let's give you a couple other criteria. Let's say that you got your CE done. Okay, you got your 4 hours of update, 4 hours of elective prior to June 10th. Oops, though I forgot to pay my renewal fee. First and foremost, how much is the renewal fee?
$45.
$45. When is the deadline to pay it?
June 30th.
June 30th. So I forgot to pay it. Oopsie whoopsie. What happens to me on July 1st?
Your license is expired.
Expired. Is it just expired?
Yes.
Yes. Expired is a standalone status, folks. Does not matter that I'm good on my education. I am just an expired broker. How do I fix expired?
Pay the fee.
Pay $90.
$90. It doubles. They punish you. They said, oops, you done messed up Aaron once again. Now it's $90. And after you pay the $90, it's still not automatic reactivation. You would have to fill out Form 2.08 again to reactivate your license. Now understand, if you are a BIC or BIC eligible broker, and if you go inactive or expired, you lose your BIC eligibility status. Because they say, listen, if you're supposed to be supervising people and you can't even keep track of your own crap, you're not doing too hot. Try again. So go ahead.
Expired, even though you're current on education, everything, you go expired, you can't transact. You can't. You're basically inactive, but you're expired.
Don't say basically inactive.
I mean, you know,
I know, but like you got to be very careful with what you say in your mind because of the way the words are. You're expired, and the only way that you can practice real estate in North Carolina is to be current and active. Think of it this way, Rob. Expired means you don't have a license at all. In theory, your license is revoked every year on June 30th, but they technically didn't give it back to you on July 1st because you didn't pay your money. As long as you pay the money, they say, okay, here's a new one. Even though it's a metaphorical thing, they're not actually giving me a new one of these, but it's basically like saying you have no license at all while you're expired. Yeah. Now, folks, let me ask you a very deeper rooted level, and we kind of talked about this a little bit in passing, and so if you get this, I'll be impressed. Is there ever a time where you can be paid for brokerage activities while you were expired or inactive?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 If the transaction happened when you were not expired.
Correct. Folks, so long as you did the brokerage activities while you were current and active. Let's say I have a closing scheduled for July 7th and I'm done. I have nothing left to do on my listing. I forget to pay my dues or I forget to take my classes July 1st. I'm inactive or expired. I better cease and desist in North Carolina. I cannot participate in that transaction at all. Somebody else in my firm can. But when it goes to closing and the firm gets their compensation as the agent technically, they can elect to share my portion with me. Why? Because they're paying me for things I did while I was current and active, so long as I didn't do any illegal brokerage activities. That ring a bell? There you go. What you got, Constantine?
You literally just answered it for me, so I'm good now.
I'm really good at that. Let me finish my thought. And then I'm going to get to his question. And then I'll tell you what, It's almost like,
I'm a Jedi.
Mind tricks. Answer this question for me, Seth. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Yeah.
You said they can elect to pay you, so they can choose not to.
Ooh, good catch, McKinney. Folks, they can elect to pay you. Your firm can have a policy that says if you go inactive or expired in the middle of a transaction, we're keeping the entire thing and not giving you nothing. If that's in your independent contract agreement, sucks to suck, Chuck. And remember what I told you. The real estate commission will not help you. The commission doesn't care about your commissions. You are screwed with a capital S. You chalk it up to should have read the independent contractor agreement and should have kept your license current and active. It depends on what's in their policies. But the commission says you can be paid if your firm wants to pay you, as long as you didn't do any illegal brokerage activity.
Is that common?
No, most of the time they'll slap us on the hand and still pay us, but it really just depends. Yeah. It really just depends. Cool. License categories, just talked about those. Let's talk about the other licenses real quick, folks, because this is something else that I know you're going to see, okay? What are the other licenses? Okay, we just talked about the broker's license and all the statuses. What other two licenses that are not broker's licenses directly do we have in North Carolina? Firm license and?
Limited.
On a commercial.
There you go. Y'all nailed it. The LNCL, Limited Non-Resident Commercial Broker's License, okay? And so those are technically two specialized licenses. Folks, who gets a firm license?
Entities.
LLCs, corporations, partnerships are your business entities. Remember, a sole proprietorship will never need a firm license because they are operating under their broker's license. They're just passing their business through them. They've not created an entity. So an entity gets a firm license. And so let me just remind you, even though I don't think y'all should be tested on this, I have a feeling you are. There is an option for brokers to create entities for compensation purposes only. And so if they want to create an LLC and they have their brokerage firms pay their commission checks into their LLC, they can, but because it's being paid, that entity, that business is being paid for brokerage activity, it needs a what?
Firm license.
Firm license. Any person, thing, or otherwise, and let me remind you of how the rule is written. If you go back to 93A-2, a real estate broker within the meaning of this chapter is any person, partnership, corporation, limited liability company, association, or other business entity doing those LL Beans activities. So if it wants to get paid for doing real property for others for compensation, all that jazz, it needs a firm license. And so understand that you would have to be what's called a qualifying broker. Because remember, we all established an entity cannot sit in my pre-licensing class. We agree on that? And so what happens is a broker who is the owner of the entity is called a qualifying broker. In other words, they qualify the entity to get a firm license. The requirements to be a QB or qualifying broker, full broker on active status. That's it. And an entity created for compensation purposes only does not need a BIC. Why? Because this isn't something that's advertised. It exists solely for the purpose of getting paid. Does that make sense? Now, that is a very advanced level topic. And so if you see a question, it'll be one. And we will teach you that in great, great detail in post-licensing. So I hate the fact that I even have to bring it up, but just in case. So we've talked about the LO Beans activities, folks. I promise you, I've got a lot of questions on my test. They're going to have a lot of questions on their test in regard to who needs a license. So we're going to give you scenarios. Grandson manages his grandmother's beach house in exchange for 1 free week at the beach house each month. Does he need a license?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's real property for others for compensation. It's a house, it's grandma's house, and you're getting something of value, which is a stay at the beach house. You need a license, okay? What about a individual refers their mother to a real estate broker who assists the mother in buying a house, and the real estate broker sends them a $500 gift card as thanks? Did that person need a license?
Yes.
Yes. That would be compensating for a legal brokerage activity. You just paid them a finder's fee as an unlicensed broker. What about this? What if a property manager sends out an advertisement to all of the tenants in their complex that says, if you send a new tenant our way, we'll give you 2 months of free rent?
That's fine.
That's fine.
No.
No, that would be a violation. That's the same thing as staying in the beach house. It's something of value.
It's something of value. Folks, let me change it. That is a violation because you're telling people who are already renting, refer me somebody to lease, which is an LO Beans activity, leasing real property. It's not them, and they're getting compensated for it. They need a license. Let me give you the other scenario that would be okay. Sign a lease today and we'll give you 2 months of free rent. Folks, that's okay. Why?
Because that's just a generalized special. It's
That's
not
like an advertisement.
Is it more individual?
Yeah, you're not getting anything. You're not getting anything in return for it.
Hold on, I need to hear the specific language.
There isn't another party.
It's not for others. It's for yourself. You get the 2 months of free rent as a party to the transaction. It's real property. You're getting something of value. It's not for others. So that's why the difference is. In the other scenario, the tenants who already live there are referring somebody else to lease. That's somebody else. That's the problem. If it's your benefit financially for your lease, it's not a problem. That's okay. Folks, if Katie called me tomorrow and says, Seth, I want you to help me buy a house, but since you're going to make all this money, I want you to give me $6,000 from the commission you are going to make. Can I give that money to Katie?
No.
Say that one more time.
Katie calls me up and says, Seth, I want you to help me buy a house tomorrow, and since you're going to be making a fat commission check, I want you to give me $6,000 from your commission at closing because you wouldn't have this deal if it wasn't for me.
You can do that.
Indirectly, because you're negotiating your fee with her, right?
She's doing it for herself.
Thank you. Folks, it is Katie's house purchase in North Carolina. It is completely okay to give an unlicensed person a portion of your commission check. It's not for others. Let me help you out, folks. Every single one of you right now, if you wanted to, you could go and put an offer in on a house yourself without a real estate professional like me. And you could ask the listing agent in North Carolina and say, give me the 2.4% or whatever it is commission that you're going to give to the buyer's agent at closing. And if they tell you that that's illegal, they just lied to your face. It is absolutely legal in North Carolina because they are a party to the transaction. Real property, money involved, not for others. It's for themselves. You've got to be very careful with these scenarios. Now, in some states, that would be illegal. In North Carolina, it's completely legal. Also, please be aware that, of course, it would be subject to lender approval. And, of course, RESPA requires that it would have to show up on the closing disclosure. If she's getting a loan, I couldn't just cut her a check outside of closing. That'd be a violation of RESPA. The Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act that says all monies as part of closing have to be on the closing disclosure. Everybody with me? Folks, I'm warning you because I know that these scenarios eat students alive. Because once again, you start getting personal about it. No, that is $7,000 to this buyer. There's no way they can do that without a license. Sure they can. It's not for others. Remember how the absolutes are. Real property, for others, for compensation, dealing with any of those LOBs activities, you need a freaking license. Otherwise, it's a legal brokerage activity in North Carolina. But if even one is missing, no license required. The other things that I'll warn you is about the testable exemptions, folks. An entity owner utilizing an employee is a full-fledged exemption. McKinney starts a company called Furland Corporation. She goes out and she buys an office building that is 80,000 square feet. She hires Dania and tells Dania to lease out all of the office units in this building. Folks, Dania can negotiate. She can show them. She can put signs in the yard. She can write up contracts. She can do whatever she wants. She is a full-fledged exemption because she is an extension of Furland Corporation. Who owns the property? Furland Corporation. Who is Dania? Also Furland Corporation. When you are an employee of an entity owner, you are also the entity. Let me change something. I buy that building. Seth Chauncey, sole proprietor. I buy that 80,000 square foot office building. And I hire Dania and I tell her to lease out the units and negotiate and do all these things. Do we have a problem?
Yes, because you're not a firm.
Yes.
We got a big problem because I'm not an institution. I'm not a business. Dania and I cannot be the same person if we're talking about a person and a person. Can we all agree? That's Dania, I'm me. And so that means that if I'm paying Dania to do these things, it is real property. It is for me. She's getting paid. License needed. Do you see the difference there?
Yes.
It is a very big distinction you have to make on the test. Because if you don't, it will eat you alive. There is a huge difference between an owner and an entity owner. What you got, Constantine?
So I'm just kind of stuck here. So how does that differentiate from the last example you gave us with the buyer?
It's like she's hiring you to do something for her. Like you're compensating her.
Mm-hmm. Understand, though, it's her purchase. Katie is buying. Katie is getting the money, and Katie's doing the real property. So she's getting compensated for this property, but it's not for anybody else. I am getting compensated for assisting Katie as well, but I can do that. Why? I'm a real estate broker. That's the whole point of being a broker, because I can help somebody buy real property that's not me and get paid to do it. The reason why I can give Katie money in that same transaction is it's her purchase. It is her purchase. It's not for others.
Okay.
And so it goes back to the tenant. Remember when I told you, if we gave compensation to somebody who's already living there to refer a new lessee, that's a problem because it's somebody else. And so let me give you another example here, Constantine. Katie is buying her own house. But if Katie, and you're going to know the answer to this, Katie sends Leighton to me. Says, help my friend Leighton buy a house and pay me $2,000. Can I do that?
No, yeah, no, you can't do that one because she's referring you to somebody else.
Well, there you go. It's somebody else. So Katie is expecting money for sending somebody else to buy real property. License required. Let's go back to the other scenario. Katie's expecting money for a house that she's buying. It's not for others. It's missing that third piece. She's getting money for real estate, but it's her. So it's missing that one critical piece. Not for others.
Yeah, that's starting to add up now. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Aren't y'all glad y'all showed up for a review day? Look, we're only like partially into it.
So glad.
Yeah. Only partially into it. We got lots more fun-filled stuff to review. Remember the other exemptions too, folks. Of course, the attorney practicing law, they can't go out and sell houses, but they can do title searches and give opinions of title and do, contracts and all that stuff. Of course, any any court-appointed or lawfully appointed person, guardian, trustee, attorney in fact, meaning somebody appointed by a power of attorney, they're all exemptions. Let me go back to the Britney Spears example that I like to use on day one. When Britney Spears was in her conservatorship, her dad, I believe his name is Jamie, was selling her mansion. Well, Jamie gets compensated. Her dad gets compensated for being her guardian. That's just how conservatorship works for rich, crazy people, apparently. So he's making money, and he would have been the one facilitating the sale of her house as her guardian. So it's real property for Britney, and he's getting paid. So that would be a normal trigger. But because it was in a court-appointed position of a power of attorney, a guardianship, a trustee, something like that, it's an exemption. You're not doing it as a broker and trying to get paid. You're doing it in the course of your actions as an appointed authority under some legal relationship. No license needed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The other one is, of course, salaried or hourly employees of broker property managers. Remember, they're not a full-fledged exemption. They can show properties for lease that their boss is managing. They can give lease agreements and have people sign them. Yep, they can have them sign the lease agreements. They can't negotiate the lease terms, though. They can never negotiate. They can pick up tenant security deposits and rent checks, and they can answer basic tenant questions. All of those are okay. So it's not a full-fledged exemption. They can't hold open houses. They can't market properties for sale. They can't do anything like that, but it is a partial exemption. And of course, the other exemption for sale by owners, they don't need a license. And then housing authorities, HOAs. They're dealing with putting liens on people's property. They're holding monies. They're collecting things like that. They still don't need a license. HOAs are exempt in North Carolina as well. Now, some of the other things we got into to wrap up the night last night was the composition of the real estate commission. Okay, and that's where I told you 9 members, 3 of them have to be brokers, 2 cannot be affiliated with real estate brokerage in any way, shape, or form. Working 3-year terms. Okay, that's what it's talking about, the composition, powers, and purpose. They can reprimand, censure, limit, revoke your license. They can't fine you. They can't put you in jail. Talked about some of the general licensing provisions we've already talked about. Let me just add some of these into the mix. Proof of licensure, folks. I don't know that they're going to test you on it, but there are rules that state that if you are asked, you have to present your license. So it's not this that we have to carry it around. They give us what's called a pocket card. And so it's a digital version of our license. It's very small. It just fits on a digital file. And so if anybody asks us, we have to prove that we are in fact a licensee. And then for firms, when you have a firm license and a principal office, the requirement is the firm license does have to be hanging up in the principal office location of the firm. There's no requirement for us to hang ours privately, but you work hard for it, so you kind of have a tendency to hang it up. Yeah, there's everything. So 3 potential questions on the North Carolina exam for them. I would say that you probably have 4 or 5 in regard to this stuff for me, if I'm being completely honest, just because I know that they're going to test it. Which leads us to the next one. Broker supervision and compensation. State exam categories, 4 items, and we'll get into the national in a minute. So, of course, when we're dealing with this, talking about when we have to have supervision, more specifically, be aware that the broker in charge has to provide active and direct supervision of the provisional broker. Folks, if a provisional broker gets in trouble with the real estate commission, the commission sends what's called a letter of inquiry. They say, tell us your side of the story, you're in the hot seat. Well, you've got 14 days to respond to a letter of inquiry, but please understand that the broker in charge is equally as in trouble as the provisional broker who's in trouble, because they were supposed to be watching you. And if they didn't, they're in trouble. So that's what that's talking about. Now, the broker in charge is always responsible, even for non-provisional brokers, active and current licensure, making sure that they renew, making sure that they take their CE, all advertisements, all records for their office. Now, the firm has different offices. Every BIC's responsible for the records of their office. Folks, how long does a BIC need to retain records for their office?
3 years?
3 years from?
Last activity.
Date of last activity. That's exactly right. 3 years from the date of last activity. So they need to maintain their records. They need to maintain their trust accounts. They need to make sure their licensees are active and current. They are responsible for all advertisings within the firm as well. Okay? Their job is to supervise and make sure everything kind of goes as it's supposed to go. Now, we have talked about a lot of different aspects of being entitled to a brokerage fee. Of course, you have to be active and current to be able to do real estate brokerage. You have to have a agency contract, okay? You cannot get paid in North Carolina unless you have a written agency agreement. Folks, that's true of buyers too. You can start off with an oral buyer agency agreement, but can we all agree it would be impossible to get to closing under an oral buyer agency agreement? Why? When do you have to reduce it to writing?
As soon as you put an offer in.
Prior to making that offer. And so you are only entitled to compensation with a written agency agreement in North Carolina. I told you some states on the national exam may recognize what's called an implied agency agreement. Our actions suggested that we were in a relationship. We don't recognize those in North Carolina from an agency point of view. Now I'll let you mull this over so far. Go take a break, come back at 7:25, and we'll keep on keeping on. Whoop, whoop. Keeping an eye on this. So let's pick back up where we left off. Okay, we are in this section talking about broker supervision and compensation. Of course, we kind of talked about the supervision. I do want to bring up this couple pieces. Be very careful on some of the contract questions and like agency contracts, folks being entitled to compensation. When we're dealing with offers, okay? If you get a test question that says, listing agent listed a home for sale and, they got an offer in which the following is true, folks, getting an offer is not enough to be entitled to compensation. Who's to say it wasn't for $2? You didn't do your job, you get an offer for $2. It is very specifically producing or procuring, whichever way you want to spin it, producing a ready, willing, and able buyer with terms acceptable to the seller, which means it would have to be at least what was in the listing agreement or better. Or if it was anything less than that, they would have to tell you it was acceptable. And if they don't do that, then it's not acceptable. Getting an offer is never going to earn you your commission. Producing a ready, willing, and able buyer terms acceptable to the seller does. Okay? Procuring cause doctrine, folks. Procuring cause doctrine, if you see that on the test, it is basically just means that you were the trigger that produced a chain of events that led to the sale of the property. That is the procuring cause doctrine. Basically saying the person who triggered that event is typically the one entitled to the compensation. Now, of course, that's where we go back into like the differentiation between different agency agreements. Well, folks, remember what I told you. Well, actually, even though we're not in that section, I'll have you tell me. What are the 3 different types of listing agreements?
Listing agreements.
Like exclusive.
Or open listing, sorry.
Yeah.
Exclusive and exclusive right to sell.
Right.
Okay. Open listing, exclusive agency, and exclusive right to sell. Okay. So what does...
Net listing, right?
Huh? No, well... Net listing, don't group them in with those. Net listing is more of a way that we're compensated, not how we're compensated. So that doesn't ever talk about when we have done our job. It just talks about how we're getting paid. So remember, a net listing means we haven't charged them a commission like 3%, 6%, whatever. We just say, when we do our job, we're going to take everything in excess of what you said you need to make. So don't group that really in with the other ones. It's still a very testable subject in that regard, but they're not in that same grouping. Kind of leave it on its own little island. So, open listing agreements work how?
Whoever procures the buyer gets compensated?
Yes, including who?
The seller.
The seller. In an open listing agreement, only the person who actually produces the buyer is entitled to compensation, and that includes the seller. The seller reserves the right to find their own buyer and pay no brokers, nothing. And so that's kind of the procuring cause doctrine. If the seller, in that regard, found their own buyer, they don't owe you anything. They procured that buyer. In a exclusive agency listing agreement, how does that one act?
Broker gets paid no matter who's sold.
That's exclusive right to sell. In this one, I think, is it any sub-agent in the firm gets paid if they procure the buyer, but the same thing, seller can...
Don't say sub-agent. So let me help you out here.
Okay.
It's if any of the broker's marketing efforts produces the buyer, then the brokers are entitled to get paid, because what they've done is they've hired one brokerage firm to list their property, and they're going to traditionally list it in a cooperative MLS, which means other brokers are going to see it, other brokers are going to bring buyers, and so it could be a cooperating brokerage firm that brings the buyer, but that's still through our marketing efforts. And so if anything that we have done ends up in getting them a buyer, we get paid. All the brokers are going to get paid because they're going to share our compensation. But same thing, they reserve the right to find their own buyer, and as their own procuring calls, then they would not have to pay any brokers anything. They could turn into a for sale by owner, say, sucks to suck, Chuck, I'm not paying you. So yet again, typically the person who brings the buyer gets paid. Now, the exception to that is, of course, in the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. In the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, there's only one firm hired, and then you're still marketing as per usual. Cooperating brokerage firms are going to share the properties. But the unique thing is, even if the seller is the procuring calls, the seller goes to church and finds their own buyer, we still get paid. Doesn't matter. Now, of course, the other time that procuring calls disputes come into play is, sometimes between, other agents and firms. If we're, confused about who's representing whom, if agency agreements have ended, we'll sometimes refer back to this procuring calls doctrine, who initiated the events, even though the agency agreement has ended. But most of the time, they're not going to go into that level of detail there. Now, to go back to your question in the chat, Shia, yes, net listings are not illegal in North Carolina, but are absolutely frowned upon because of the high likelihood of impropriety in that regard. That's right. So, now this is just clarifying that we may still be entitled to compensation even if they don't fulfill the contract. We know that. Even if they breach contract, even if they can't convey clear title, if we've procured a ready, willing, and able buyer, we could still be entitled to compensation even though they don't go to closing in that regard. Sharing of listing broker's compensation. Remember, folks, typically what happens is the listing firm will charge the seller X amount, and then they will say, okay, of that amount, we're going to share this amount with a cooperating brokerage firm. Well, please understand, if it's a dual agency transaction, they would just keep it all in-house. We're charging 6%. If there's a cooperating brokerage firm, we'll share this much. But if it's dual agency, we're keeping the full 6%. It's just going to go to different licensees, potentially within our firm. So that would be outlined. Are we going to do in-house sales? Are we going to do co-brokered sales? Are we going to allow cooperating seller sub-agency? Are we going to cooperate and compensate cooperating seller sub-agents? Now, that'll come back up in the agency section because you'll find that some of these topics repeat, which is why we don't focus on the syllabus for course flow, because otherwise we'd be repeating stuff. This is only useful for studying. That's it. Earning compensation as a buyer. Remember, current and active licensure still. Valid written agency agreement in North Carolina. And then, of course, ultimately, when we're dealing with this, if they get under contract at all while they're in that relationship with us, they owe us our commission. We talked about the legal payment to a broker with an expired or inactive license. Also, just remember the terms retainer fee and success fee. Retainer is the amount you charge up front for basically buy-in to them to have some skin in the game. Not required, but something that you could optionally do, and then it could be credited towards their commission or not. And then a success fee typically is you've successfully negotiated a contract, and as such, are entitled to keep the fee. They're really not going to do anything crazy with those. We talked about the legal payment to active or expired or inactive broker, so long as they did things while they were current and active. Real property characteristics, legal descriptions, and property. 9 items that they have grouped in here from a national exam category point of view. This is where your real estate basic concepts come in. Land, the earth's surface, everything above, everything below. Real estate, all the improvements thereon, both man-made and artificial, plus the land. And then real property, the real estate plus what we call the bundle of legal rights. Real property is very different than personal property. Personal property is everything else. Your couches, your chairs, your cars, your this, your that, the other. Physical characteristics of land, we started way back in the day, immobility, indestructibility, and uniqueness, also called those silly words non-homogeneity, okay, not the same, also called heterogeneity, not the same. Economic characteristics, slip, scarcity, location. Remember, situs is a vocab word that means area preference. Improvements, sidewalks, houses, infrastructure, wells, septic tanks, all those are considered improvements. And then permanence of investment. Remember, real estate is a very permanent investment. It is considered a good investment, although the biggest downfall with real estate as an investment is it lacks liquidity, meaning it takes some time to turn it into cash. Okay, you can't sell them overnight. Property ownership, we talked about real property versus personal property. Remember the terms severance versus annexation. That is where we're dealing with things that are personal becoming real and real becoming personal. So if I go to Home Depot and I buy a ceiling fan, it's in the back of my truck. It's personal property while it's in the back of my truck. When I attach it to my house, it is annexed. Annexation is attaching it and becoming part of the real property. And then it's probably going to stay there for the new owner. Now remember, if things are fixtures, or in other words, part of the real property, they default to what?
Repeat the question?
If things are fixtures, or in other words, part of the real property, what is the default for them in a sales transaction?
They stay with the
property.
They stay with the property and go to the new owner. If things are personal property, what is the default form in a sales transaction?
They go with the seller.
They leave with the seller. And so the only time that we need to make mention of these individual pieces on a sales contract is if we want them to do what?
The opposite.
Opposite of what they're supposed to do.
The opposite of what they're supposed to do. And so if we said that ceiling fan is important to me, I want to take it with me when I go. Well, the way we do that is negotiating that in the contract that the buyer is okay with me taking it. That is called severance. Something that was real property, severing it back off and making it personal property. Again, remember some of the other vocab? Fruits of the soil, the fructus naturalis, well, technically fructus naturalis is fruits of the soil. They got this kind of silly in here. Fructus naturalis is fruits of the soil, and that is considered fixtures, okay? Your things that are not harvested, your rose bushes, your azaleas, your pine tree, your oak tree, those are part of the real property. They stay with the house. Fructus industrialis, also referred to as implements, your corn, your cotton, your things that are harvested. Even a tenant farmer renting land has the rights to come back and get their crops even after the land is sold. We cannot ever destroy their personal property. So that is that fructus industrialis. Now remember, IRMA, folks. When we're dealing with your test, yes, the default for fixtures is nailed, screwed, glued, or buried. But when we're talking about IRMA, IRMA is not the default for us. IRMA is the total circumstance test. It is a legal test. That means it's applied by who?
The court.
The courts. And so that means, yet again, you already messed up as a real estate professional. If your client is going to court and the court's Judge Judy is applying IRMA, we've already have an issue. But IRMA is absolute. Here's what they do. They base it on solely these four criteria. Intent of the annexor, meaning the person who attached it. Relationship of the annexor, meaning the person who attached it, right? Was it a tenant? Was it the property owner that attached it? What was the method of attachment, meaning how permanent? Was there one screw? Was there 1,000 screws? Was there additional framing, right? How permanent? And then adaptation to the real estate. How much did the real estate change if this was taken away? Does the place still function? Does it still make sense if this is taken away? That's the only criteria that the courts use under the total circumstance test. Folks, 3 things that are never considered: size, value, and location. Remember trade fixtures. What was the other word for trade fixtures, folks?
Personality?
Not personality.
I'm going to take a stab. Was it chattel? Or chattel?
Chattel. Need more. It was also called a chattel fixture. Now, before I clarify this, folks, remember, what does that word chattel mean?
movable.
Yeah, you remember that, don't you? Yeah. Movable personal property. Chattel is movable personal property. And so, folks, chattel fixture, remember I told you it's called an oxymoron. They contradict themselves. There you go, Zach. And so what is a trade fixture is also referred to as a chattel fixture because even though it may be semi-permanently attached, it is when a tenant in a commercial building will purchase their own prep tables and hood vents and equipment or whatever it is. And when they attach it, even though it may be attached, it remains personal property that can be removed at the end of their tenancy. If you are renting a restaurant and you bought all the prep tables, the hoods, the refrigerators, the walk, all that stuff, it would remain a trade fixture that you can take with you at the end of your tenancy. Now, remember I told you if you abandon it, the owner could inherit it by way of accession because you abandoned it in their property, but it remains personal property that can be removed. That's why it's called a chattel fixture because it does not act like any other fixture, even though it's called one. Now, remember too, in North Carolina, because, I'm going to add that in the mix, even though we're talking, I think, about national right now. In North Carolina, there is also an agricultural fixture. Remember, agricultural fixtures, even when there is a tenant farmer on agricultural land, if they install something permanent, like a grain silo, a barn, or something like that, it automatically becomes what?
Property of the landowner?
Real property of the landowner. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. What you got, Josh? Oh, were you talking? Oh,
no.
Oh, you're thinking still.
I tried to answer the question.
Oh, no worries. If you think of it, just let me know.
Oh, I just got it.
Okay.
Is there any, it's about a test being scenario based, is there any, trade fixture that has been debatable in the past in trying to be severed, or was just usually debatable? Like, some people may not know that a refrigerator is something that is problematic in a residential trade.
Okay, well, so don't bring trade fixture into this because trade fixtures have nothing to do with residential, right?
I'm just saying, because from using it as a reference point, because I understand that a refrigerator is something that is debatable.
Well, a refrigerator is not debatable in our state. In North Carolina, a refrigerator is personal property, no ifs, ands, buts, or coconuts. So some states look at it differently. And so remember, Josh, the thing is, you've got to know for the test the defaults of a lot of stuff, but everything in real estate is negotiable. If you want the fridge, ask for it. If you don't ask for it, it's leaving with the seller in North Carolina. In other states, it may be included. So the biggest thing to do is just, if we're not sure, because sometimes we're not sure, the biggest thing to do is to spell it out on the contract. What's going to happen to it? Make sure we all agree.
Okay.
Yeah. Another piece of clarity on improvements. Remember, there is improvements to the land and improvements on the land. Of course, improvements to the land, infrastructure in nature, sidewalks, sewer, plumbing, piping, utilities. Improvements on the land, private in nature, fences, houses, garages, things of that nature. Remember, on the national exam, you could see the word improvement and consider it an appurtenance because improvements are appurtenances. What is an appurtenance? What does that mean?
Runs with the land.
Runs with the land. There's a lot of different things that run with the land. Remember the encumbrances section, folks. What is an encumbrance?
It's a limitation on the property.
Some type of limitation on the property. There are financial encumbrances. There are physical encumbrances. Liens are financial. Now, even within the liens, there is voluntary liens and involuntary liens. Your mortgage is a voluntary lien. Your deed of trust in North Carolina is a voluntary lien because the bank's not lending you that money unless you agree to it. But then there is also other involuntary liens. What other involuntary liens might come into play?
Eminent domain.
That's not going to be a lien per se. That's going to be them taking the property. Lien is you owe somebody money.
So foreclosure would be one of them.
Property taxes.
Real property tax liens are going to be an involuntary. If you don't pay your real property taxes, the tax assessor will put a lien on your property. There was, of course, two others. Mechanics liens. If you don't pay your contractor, they can come and put a lien on your property up to 120 days after they finish work. And remember, those mechanics liens backdate to as if they were put on the day that they started work or dropped off materials. There's one more involuntary lien.
HOA.
Well, I guess technically that one too, but there's another big one.
If there's like multiple mortgages.
A second mortgage?
Well, that's going to be a voluntary.
Is it the actual cost of the foreclosure itself?
Nope, that would be a cost associated with the foreclosure, but yet again, not a lien. It would be paid at the time of the foreclosure. How about special assessments? Special assessments. Y'all remember those? Special assessments, when a taxing authority or governing authority, and sometimes even an HOA, goes out and does something to improve your property, they have the right to charge you for it. That's called a special assessment lien. And so they come out and they put sidewalks along your property. And they say, you're welcome. We've made your property better and more valuable. Here's your bill. And they will attach a lien to your property called a special assessment. Now, what is the highest priority lien always?
Your taxes.
Real property tax liens. Folks, do not confuse that with federal income taxes or anything like that. Real property tax liens, which are specific liens. And then what is second only to that?
Special assessments.
Special assessments. Everything else is in first come, first serve order. In other words, order of recordation, except for mechanics liens that have that special rule that they backdate to the day that labor was started or materials were dropped off. Hopefully this is ringing a little bit of a bell. Just weeks ago, but ringing a bell. Couple other things, just honorable mentions in the encumbrances. Remember Liz Pendon's notice of pending litigation. It's not saying the house can't be sold, but if you were to buy it, you would be taking it subject to any potential litigation that was going to ensue, whether it be a foreclosure or a divorce decree or whatever it is. It also notifies the public that they may want to participate in that litigation prior to it happening if they have any claims against it. Restrictive covenants, also called protective covenants, falling under the category of CC&Rs, stands for covenants, conditions, restrictions. They are a physical encumbrance. You can't have chickens. You can't have a fence taller than 4 feet. You can't have a shed unless it matches your house. Okay, those are encumbrances. And they are also what? Appurtenant. Because they run with the land. If I can't have chickens and you buy my house, you also can't have chickens. It wasn't me that was the problem. It was attached to that piece of real property. Okay, and that is
come with the fleas.
The dogs come with the fleas, as they say. Like I said, it's always funny when he uses that saying. But not all things appurtenances are bad, but fleas are arguably always bad. So, remember easements, folks. What is an easement?
It's like a right of passage.
That's the power company, right?
Is that being if you own the property in front of me that has, I need to go through your property, so you have to give me a way to go over it?
All of these are examples, but what is the definition of an easement?
Right.
It grants non-possessory rights to use land of another.
There you go. Let's combine Cheyenne and Katie. It is the right to use the property of another. Not ownership, but the right to use. And so everything that y'all gave me were examples of that. So we had an appurtenant easement and an easement in gross. An appurtenant easement involves two pieces of what?
Two pieces of property. I'm in the state of serving in the state.
Two pieces of property. So it is specifically parcel A and parcel B. And there's one giving the benefit and one getting the benefit. And so as Josh said, the dominant tenement is the one getting the benefit. The servient tenement is the one giving the benefit. And it's an appurtenant easement because it's not granted to Josh. It's not granted to Fabiola. It's not granted to a person. It's granted to parcel A and parcel B. Whoever owns parcel A and parcel B gets to continue to use them. Not to be confused with an easement in gross that is granted between a parcel and a person. Okay? Parcel A has granted rights to Rob. And if Rob dies, the easement in gross dies. If Rob moves away, the easement in gross also dies. But if this person moves away, it's still bound by that easement in gross because the property granted those rights to Rob. Of course, the other one was the commercial easement in gross, which is, as you said, the power companies having the right to access the power lines. And that one doesn't really die because businesses can absorb that business and take over that easement in gross or that commercial easement in gross. We really need to go, remember easements can be created by express agreement. and then you record them. They can be, well, let's focus on the two main ones. The easement by prescription was the really confusing one that meets the exact same criteria as adverse possession. What was the acronym that we used for an easement by prescription and adverse possession?
I don't know what happened.
Ocean.
Ocean.
But easement by prescription is what you have.
An easement by prescription is a certain way that it's granted. An easement by prescription uses that acronym OCEAN.
I'm sorry. With your lake house.
Okay,
so what I'm trying to say is the easement by prescription is you allowing your friends or family members to use the lake only by letting you know in advance. But it is something that will terminate at either one of your deaths.
Now, so hold on. Here's where you got to be careful. An easement by prescription is just telling you the way that it was created. It's not an actual easement. The only easements that you need to worry about for the test are your pertinent easement and your easement in gross. So an easement by prescription is just talking about the way that it's formed. So when we say it's formed by way of meeting this certain criteria, and so that is the OCEAN acronym over 20 years. OCEAN,
intentional,
open, continuous, exclusive, adverse, and notorious. Yeah. Open means you're not hiding it. Okay. Continuous means you haven't stopped doing it for 20 years. Exclusive means you're the only one doing it. Adverse means adverse to the ownership. It's not yours and you know it. And then notorious meaning without permission. But remember the difference. While the criteria is the exact same in North Carolina, an easement by prescription is if I go to enforce it, I should get to keep doing this because I met these criteria. That's an easement by prescription. An adverse possession is I should get to own it because I met these criteria. It's stealing property from somebody else. Be very careful on the test. Same exact criteria. Okay, same exact criteria. Of course, the other one was by necessity. And so in North Carolina, you cannot be landlocked. So if you buy property that does not have public right-of-way access, you can force the courts to give you an easement by necessity. Let's get into some of the other bigger and better things as we go along. Encroachments. Remember, that is an improvement built over a property line. Remember legal descriptions, folks. What are the main types of legal descriptions that we talked about?
Meets and bounds.
Meets and bounds.
Government reticulum.
Government survey system.
And lot and block.
Yeah, there you go. Robinson, lot and block method. And then, of course, there's also reference to a recorded deed. Now, folks, why are legal descriptions so important?
Because there could be a duplicate of addresses.
There can be a duplicate of addresses, and we need to make sure that everything is clearly identified on who is getting what, when, where, why, how, all that stuff. There's no confusion about which property is being conveyed, anything like that. And so we need a legal description for sales contracts, for deeds of trust, all that jazz. Could a property management agreement arguably just have the address? Maybe, but we still typically put legal descriptions on there. And so which method is commonly used in the original 13 colonies?
Meets and bounds.
Meets and bounds.
The meets and bounds legal description. And what words could you see in a meets and bounds legal description?
Monuments.
Monuments. Markers.
Stakes.
And degrees.
Yeah. Minutes, degrees, monuments, point of beginning, calls, bounds, okay, all of these different things. Remember, a meets and bounds always starts at the same point of beginning and always ends where?
Point of beginning.
The same point of beginning. You got to close it, okay? And so then you utilize calls to tell you which direction and how far to go. Thence go 182 degrees, northwest 172 meters or feet or whatever. And that should end up in another monument that shows you're in the right place. And then you do the next one, and they go clockwise around trying to close it. So you just have to be able to identify the monuments, point of beginning, meets, bounds, minutes, degrees, hence, thence, all these fun-filled things. That's really the extent of what you're going to need to know about a meets and bounds. Okay? Government survey system, commonly utilized where?
West of the
Western U.S.
West of the Mississippi. That's right. West of the Mississippi. Now, folks, the government survey system utilizes what in order to identify what area we are talking about? This is a challenge question.
Aren't they called townships?
Townships, but understand that there are so many areas out there, we have to start somewhere else before we start talking about the township.
Sections?
Nope, sections are even smaller. We got to go bigger.
Oh, wait, are you talking about like another word for it?
No, not another.
So U.S. Public Land Survey System?
Range and...
Oh,
there you go. Let's take it a step further, but you're getting closer. Principal meridians and baselines. Principal meridians and baselines. Folks, they're not going to make these things go for infinity, because then you would be dealing with, township 7,000 or whatever. So they have principal meridians and baselines, so they would start at this principal meridian and baseline where they intersect, and they say, okay, this is our principal meridian and baseline we're referring to, but there's more than just one. So these are referenced by starting with a principal meridian and baseline, the X and Y axis, if you will. And then once we tell you which principal meridian and baseline we're utilizing, now we start referencing it by way of what? You already said it.
Townships.
Townships, there you go. And so if you were looking at the principal meridians and baselines, every place that there was a hash mark was how far?
6 miles.
6 miles. You go right, 6 miles, 6 miles, 6 miles up, 6 miles, 6 miles, 6 miles. Remember, these are based on north, south, east, and west. Okay? Well, what's the smaller unit inside a township?
1 mile square.
Well, what is it called? The smaller... The sections. Sections. And how many sections are in a township?
36.
36. What is the section at the top right?
1.
What is the section at the bottom right?
36.
36. How big is one section?
3 miles. 3 miles.
1
mile.
square acre.
1 mile by 1 mile. Okay, it is 1 square mile. 1 square mile. And how many acres are in that one section?
640.
640. McKinney, what are you laughing at? Josh? Is that what you're laughing at? He's like, yeah. Josh is freaking out over there. He's either hyped or terrified. I can't tell which one.
He figured it out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
That's true. I remember him struggling on that.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's right. I forgot about that. Josh, we talked for like 45 minutes on that. You're just like, but I don't. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Almost going in the record book.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. That's right. That's what's up. So, folks, I told you that's really the bulk. I think, once again, I've been told that you don't have any math on that. So being able to identify that they're based on principal meridians and baselines, that they are townships and sections. Sections are 1 mile by 1 mile. Sections contain 640 acres, used predominantly west of the Mississippi. Of course, then in reference to a recorded plat, it's just, all of phase 1 of Rolling Hills subdivision, lot 2 or whatever. So it's where, folks, be very careful on the test. I'm warning you. It's not an informal drawing of the neighborhood. The lot and block method uses an actual surveyed out and recorded version of it. Don't get tripped up on the test. If I say which of the following would be an adequate legal description and you say a builder referencing lot 2 on an informal drawing they did of the neighborhood, that's not a lot and block reference. It has to be actually surveyed out, done by a civil engineer and a surveyor, and then recorded at the Register of Deeds. Okay? That would be what they reference. Being all of Lot 1 of Phase 2 of Rolling Hill subdivision as recorded in Book of Maps 72, page 735. That is the lot and block method. And then, of course, reference to a recorded deed is just referring to any deed because that deed also has to contain the legal description. Okay? And so when you look at that deed, it's going to have a lot and block method. It's going to have the meets and bounds method. It's going to have something else on there. And so that's why that is an adequate one sometimes as well. Remember surveys, folks. Surveys are not required. However, they are a good idea to figure out any encroachments, any floodplains, any easements, any public right-of-way access. And then another interesting thing, just because I don't know if they're going to throw it at you or not, and right here. Yeah, they are going to throw it at you. If you elect to not have a survey, but having a survey would have resulted in you discovering a title defect, your title insurance policy will not cover it. Because they say, well, you should have gotten a survey and then we would have been able to figure this out before you bought it. So they're not going to cover it if you elect to not have a survey. Yeah, McKinney, cute dog that's not allowing you to study. It reminds me of my dog. That's exactly what my dog does. If I sit on the couch, he's in my face. Stop it.
Yeah, she's very needy.
Yeah, I know the type. Lane use controls, folks. Remember, public versus private. Public is government. Use of police power, okay? Government. Public land use controls for a total municipality for the greater good enforced by the police. Private land use controls are created and enforced by private property owners, folks. Restrictive covenants are which of the two?
Private.
Private, which means that if somebody was not adhering to your private land use controls in your neighborhood, what would you have to do to enforce them on them?
Take them to court.
Take them to court. Take them to court. Folks, I'm going to warn you. Do not automatically report them to the HOA. Do you always have an HOA when you have private land use controls?
No.
No. So reporting them to the HOA is not a guaranteed issue because you might not have one. The way to handle private land use controls is to take the private property owner to court. Civil injunction. Force somebody to do what they're legally obligated to do. Now the government, though, they can charge you criminally for violating any of their zoning or ordinances. Now, of course, PEAT is just a way to remember some of the governmental powers. I don't think we talked about that acronym. Police power for enforcing zoning and public land use controls. Escheat we did talk about. What is escheat, folks?
It's cheating to the state when there's nobody alive anymore and you have 7 layers of your family and you can't find them. The government takes it and then everything that's attached to it is wiped out, like the Dick's Farm. Dick's Park, whatever it is.
What'd you say? Dick's? What?
Dick's Farm.
I'm not
Sorry.
kidding. Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm just picking on you. Yeah, because we all remember the example I gave about the Dick's family. Ain't no Dick's left. Yeah.
That's helpful.
I know. Listen, there's a method to my madness, Camilla. That's why I say these crazy things. You have a tendency to remember them. So, yes, you're exactly right. Escheat is when you die without a will. What do we call it when you die without a will?
Intestate.
Intestate. Dying without a will is called dying intestate, and that means that the North Carolina has what we call the law of intestate succession, meaning they will write a will for you. And as Camilla said, it goes about 7 degrees down, and if they can't find anybody in that list, they say, well, sucks to suck, it's ours now. And so they take it. They say, it's now ours, and the state of North Carolina will sell it at auction, and it's supposed to go to public school income. I don't know if it does or not. So government powers, police power, escheat, taxation, obviously, and eminent domain. Eminent domain is what?
Government takes your property for the greater good.
The right to take the property for the greater good. They do have to provide you fair and just compensation. North Carolina is a right to take state. You cannot contest them taking it, but you can contest how much money they are going to give you. And then what is the act of taking it called?
Condemnation.
Condemnation. Condemnation. That's exactly right. Remember zoning. Zoning is what the government would like to see in a given area. Ordinances are the rules within that zoning. And so it could be R1, R2, AR, C5, whatever. And then ultimately the ordinances will say, well, you can build a single family detached home as long as it's 2,000 square feet. You can operate this business. You can't build that, so on and so forth. Now remember the big terminologies that come into question here, folks. When you are not complying with the zoning, meaning your house currently does not meet the zoning requirements, what do we call that generically?
Non-conforming use.
Non-conforming. That's exactly right. Non-conforming use. It means you are not currently meeting the zoning. And there are 2 different types of non-conforming uses. They could be both this or that.
Legal or illegal.
Nailed it. Legal or illegal. And so which one is the legal non-conforming use?
When you were
grandfathered in.
Yeah, it existed before the zoning laws came into play.
You created a grocery store at a time it was zoned commercial and it allowed grocery stores. The government comes in and they say, well, hey, we want this to be residential now. They're not going to stop you from, I was thinking it too. They're not going to stop you from being a grocery store. So they're going to allow you to be grandfathered in, called a legal non-conforming use. And in theory, you could continue in perpetuity. However, they typically will set guidelines. They're not going to approve any additional commercial permits. If it burns down, they're probably not going to let you rebuild it. They're not going to let you install new stuff, right? But you are legally allowed to be there. And so if you are an illegal non-conforming use, that means you did what?
You built out of zoning.
You ignored the rules from the word go. You bought a residential property and you built a commercial property on it. And that is, folks, remember, if you sell that property that's an illegal non-conforming use, what is it to the new owner?
Scrap pile.
No, it is now. They can't benefit from that.
Yeah, it's illegal.
It's still an illegal non-conforming use. There's no sales grandfathering you in. If it's illegal, it'd be like me selling you crystal meth and like it's automatically legal because you have the crystal meth now? No. So if it's illegal when I sell it to you, it's still illegal when you get it. Okay? An illegal non-conforming use being sold to a consumer would still be an illegal non-conforming use. Now, a lot of times the legal non-conforming uses can be sold, but they may put restrictions on who and how and when and where and why. So keep that in mind. I'm not going to really spend time on these vocab. Just make sure, remember variance, folks. What is a variance?
A variance is it's a way for you to get your zoning approved. So if it's not undue hardship, I can only give you an example. So is it okay if I give you an example?
You can, yeah, sure. Give me an example.
A variance would be if you're adding onto your property and the city has like a property line regulation and your property is too close to that line.
Okay, yeah.
But it doesn't cause any distinct difference to the actual appeal of the community.
Yeah, and so let me kind of spin a different way. I mean, you're on it, but let me just make sure we articulate it the right way. A variance is when you ask the government for an exception to one of the rules. Yes, the rules are in place. Yes, the zoning is in place. I'm asking for permission to ignore a rule. We're not rezoning, okay? We're not changing the zoning, but because of an undue hardship that adversely affects only me, this rule is making my life hard, and so I'm going to ask you to give me an exception to this one rule. And so you're right, setbacks is an example, and that's the example I gave. If you buy a lot and then you find out that there's a riparian buffer and then there's setbacks on all sides, and because of all these things, you could build a house that's about 6 feet by 6 feet. You may ask them for a variance to build a little bit closer to the setbacks than they normally would allow. Now, are variances normally granted? No. But the biggest thing to understand from a testable point of view is we are not rezoning. It is not a special use permit. It is not a conditional use permit. It is just permission to ignore a rule. That's it. Be like, I don't know if any of your parents did this, but like the old wives' tale, right? You can't swim within 30 minutes after eating. It'd be like being on vacation. Be like, Mom, can I just try this one time? She's like, screw it, it's vacation. I don't care, right? She's going to let it happen this one time. But the next time you ask, she's going to say hells to the no, okay? That's all it is. You are asking permission to ignore one rule because of an undue hardship that adversely affects you and only you. Remember, overlay district is just two different zonings laying over top of each other. Historic preservation zoning, I told you, is where they would basically say, well, because of the historic nature, you have to maintain the property a certain way. It has to have certain types of repairs. May have to get special permits. Aesthetic zoning is, a pretty area between two other areas. Spot zoning, rezoning a very small piece, typically considered illegal unless they can prove it's for the greater good. I think we're good on that. Maybe in some of the other more testable stuff. Nope, that's fine. And if you see anything that you're like, please talk about that, I will, but I want to get in the most testable things. Property taxes and insurance. I'm not going to go nuts here. Remember what I told you. Mathematically speaking, all your math is on the state portion, or the national portion, not the state portion. And so when you get math questions, just do what the question tells you. Nobody gets hurt. North Carolina typically operates off of a per 100 rate for taxes. There's a lot of other states that operate off of a mill rate. Remember what a mill rate, that means you are getting charged this rate based on what?
Per $1,000.
Per $1,000 of...
$1.
There's a word for it. What are we basing the taxes off of?
Assessed value.
Assessed value. Okay, assessed value. Now, sometimes other states will use those equalization factors, and they may say that the assessed value is 80% of the market value. That's an equalization factor. So you would just take the market value and multiply by 80%, you know, to figure out what they're basing the taxes on. But North Carolina, we have this third-party tax assessor who tells us what they think our property is worth. Zero correlation with our actual values. But they tell us what they think the assessed value is, and that's what we're basing the taxes off of. Folks, how often do our tax rates change in North Carolina?
Every 8 years.
Every year.
Every year.
Annually, but they have to do it at least every 8 years.
I hate these questions.
Hold on. We got to, we got to be careful.
Is the 8-year part.
Yeah. And so some of y'all got it. Some of y'all bleeding over some information. So let me clarify. Tax rates can and do change every year. There's no requirement for them to in any way, shape, and form, but they can and they do. Do not confuse that with reevaluating the assessed value. The assessed value has to be reevaluated at minimum every 8 years in North Carolina. In North Carolina, we have what's called a mandatory octennial reappraisal. The rate can change every year and does. The assessed value has to change at minimum every 8 years, but the assessed value can also change
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years. They can do a horizontal reassessment every 4 years, meaning across the board. They can't pick and choose neighborhoods. It has to be the entire county. Okay? Every 4 years. Be very careful. Okay? I'm going to be completely honest with you folks. As an instructor who has been doing this for a very long time, sometimes when I'm writing new test questions or when I change things around, I will go back in and I will start retaking the test to make sure they're fair, because sometimes there's typos, sometimes there's mistakes, and I would never hold anything like that against you, rest assured. But I have found myself getting mad at a question because I'll like get a question wrong as an instructor, and I'll go back and look at it. I'm like, this stupid question is so wrong, and I'll reread it. I'm like, oh shoot, it said tax rate. It didn't say assessed value.
That's me.
Yeah. Even knowing what to look for, it sometimes gets me. Now, truth to be told, when I take these tests, I'm typically drinking tequila and sitting on my couch. So I'm not really trying my hardest. But you get what I'm saying. It's still, actually, it's typically bourbon. Tequila is, I can't do the test with tequila.
Probably a good strategy, to be honest. Keep yourself level-headed.
Keep calm, right? Calm, cool, and collected. Yeah, until it's too much. And then I start answering potato. Anyway, yeah, so just make sure you're careful, all right? Be very careful. Mandatory octennial reappraisal for the assessed value can happen every 4 years. Tax rates can and do change every year. Okay, can and do change every year. Remember the basic calculations on mill rates and per 100 rates. I'm not going to practice those at the moment, but maybe we'll get into some math here in a little bit. Machinery Act is what gives the powers to the local municipalities. Remember, folks, real property taxes are local in nature, okay? Very local in nature. It is your city, your county, your township levying the taxes. Not Biden, not the IRS, not any of that. Remember too, folks, don't get so caught up on the dates for your prorations, and because I'm telling you, the math questions can be stupid. They could tell you something like you're closing on January 5th and the sellers already paid their taxes. Just answer the question as if the sellers already paid their taxes. Calculate how much they would have to, the buyer would have to reimburse them for the rest of the year. But you could absolutely get questions on the North Carolina side of, you know, when do we consider taxes due and payable in North Carolina? Which would be?
September 1.
September 1. There you go. Okay, tax rate is set on July 1st. Tax bill is considered due and payable on September 1. But anytime we're doing prorations, it's for the full year. It's never dependent on those numbers in any way, shape, and form. We already talked about lien priority. Folks, what is excise tax? Don't confuse that with real property tax. Okay, real property tax versus excise tax.
It's paid by
Like the sales
It's
tax.
the sale.
give it to the lawyer to then pay.
Yeah, excise tax, also called, tell me the other names, also called what?
Deep transfer tax.
Transfer tax and
Revenue stamp.
revenue stamps. There you go. And one of you called it sales tax. You're not wrong, but be very careful. It is only paid when the property is being sold, but it's not sales tax because it's not being charged to the buyer. It defaults to being charged to the seller. So on the closing disclosure, meaning the settlement statement, how does it appear on the closing disclosure? Excise tax.
Seller sign debit.
Single entry, seller, debit. Now, Josh, while we're sitting here talking about this, if we were talking about cost that would be a seller debit at closing, do not pick capital gains tax. Folks, there is a potential for sellers to pay capital gains tax, but when would they be paying that?
When they file their tax.
When they file their income taxes with the IRS, not at closing. And folks, I'm going to be completely honest with you. That's a question on the final exam. You're welcome.
Could you say, I remember that. Can you say it one more time?
Oh, no, I only say it once. I can't. But Josh asked the question the other day, and I was wondering if it's on the practice midterm or if Josh remembered it from the final. But so I was just like, let me just help Josh out because he asked the question the other day. So, no, I'm kidding. I'll repeat it. Capital gains tax is not something the seller will have to pay at closing. So if I asked you which of the following would be a debit the seller has to pay at closing, and two of your options were capital gains tax and excise tax is paid at closing by the seller as a seller debit. Capital gains tax is something paid by the seller if applicable, but it would not be paid until they filed their taxes with the IRS in the following year. That make sense?
Yes, invested fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if you invest it, technically you still have to pay it if you didn't do it, if you didn't fall into that exemption. Because it gets reported. What'd you say, Constantine?
I said, how much for another freebie?
Oh, yeah. I'll send you $10 per question leak. Nice. This could be a super lucrative business model for me. I'm just like, all right, this one, all right. For $120, I'll send you a copy of the test. Just kidding. Just kidding. Don't get anybody getting excited. Some of you are like, what's your Venmo?
You have Venmo.
Yeah, right. See, there you go. What's your Cash App? No, I would never.
What's your Venmo say?
It's not happening. But that's why we're here, because I want every single one of you to succeed without having to pay me money. Okay? I'm not in it for the money. Although, I'm just kidding. Calculations, excise tax, homeowners insurance. Folks, don't forget, multiple types of insurance in here. Did the math on that. 2% of the questions right already. Good call. Homeowners insurance, also called hazard insurance, insures your actual structure, folks. Please be aware that title insurance insures your concept of ownership. Your title insurance never protects your house in any way, shape, and form. And then what was the other type of insurance? I told you there are 3 types of insurances you're going to run into on the test. Homeowners or hazard, title, and
Private mortgage insurance?
Private mortgage insurance, but there's also another version of that exact same one.
Right.
No?
No.
Property?
Just drop one word off of private mortgage insurance.
Mortgage.
Mortgage insurance. Folks, if it is a conventional loan, which is a private loan where the lender bears all risks, if you put down less than what down payment?
20%.
If you put down less than 20% down payment, the bank is going to require you to get PMI, which is private mortgage insurance, and a conventional loan. Well, folks, if you get an FHA loan, which is only what was the down payment on an FHA loan?
3%.
3.5.
3.5%. So it's a 96.5% loan to value ratio. Very high loan to value ratio there. By the way, what does FHA stand for?
Federal housing.
Fair housing.
Not fair housing.
Not fair housing.
Equal credit, equal opportunity.
Nope.
Authority.
You got it, Constantine. It was just administration was the word you're looking for. The Federal Housing Administration. The Federal Housing Administration.
It was on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I know. So not fair housing, but folks, the reason why when we're dealing with FHA loans, they do have mortgage insurance, but we just call it MI, mortgage insurance. It's not private. It's subsidized by the Federal Housing Administration. Okay? It is a government-backed insurance, and as such, the rates are better because the government is backing it. But they're both mortgage insurance, and what that insurance is, folks, is that full insurance coverage on the purchase price?
For which one?
Any of them.
No.
No.
Up to 80%, right?
There you go. 20% really. It's really only covering the spread from the down payment that you put down up to the 20% the banks would have liked to have seen you put down. That's exactly right. And then remember too, with the VA loans, we don't call it insurance, it's a VA guaranteed. Technically, the Department of Veterans Affairs is your insurance company. But because it's not an insurance policy you have to pay for it, they have just written a guarantee. We will cut the check to cover that 20% spread if our borrower defaults. Okay, so that's why we call it a guarantee. So make sure you keep that right. Real quick in regard to insurance, folks, what is the standard homeowners and policy called that meets the minimum requirements for lenders?
HO3.
HO3. And that is what's called a named exemption policy because it covers everything except for any specifically named exemptions. Okay, well, what if you wanted renter's insurance? What is that one called?
HO4.
HO4. What if you wanted condominium insurance?
HO6.
HO6. And there is one under HO3. It is called a named perils policy. It's called an HO2 because basically it only covers the things named. You see the difference? HO2 names what they cover, and that's all they cover. An HO3 covers everything except the things that they name. That is why it's an exemption versus a named perils policy. Now, the HO2 is not nearly as testable, but, you know, as you see, that could be on there. Remember, flood insurance is never part of any of those. That is separate insurance. Folks, do you have to have homeowners insurance?
Not unless you're getting a loan.
There you go.
If you have a mortgage.
Only if you have a mortgage. And if any part of your house is located in a floodplain and you have a mortgage, you're probably going to need to have what?
Flood insurance.
Flood insurance. There you go. How about this? Talking about property disclosures and environmental. Folks, what is the trigger for the lead-based paint disclosure?
House is built before 1978.
The house was built before or prior to 1978. Be very careful on the test. We will give you questions where we say the house was built in 78. That does not trigger the need for the disclosure. It would have to be built in 77 or before, prior to 78. Now, folks, what is the only thing that is really required under the lead-based paint hazard reduction, or the disclosure? Let's just call it the disclosure. What is the only thing that we really have to do?
No, you have to disclose that with potential buyers because it's a material fact.
Potential buyers and long-term residential tenants, both. And all you have to do as a seller is say, I do know or I don't know. Okay, I do know or I don't know. And I have reports or I don't have reports. Folks, please do not get caught up on the test. There is no obligation to have it tested. There is no obligation to have it remediated. There is no obligation to have it removed. There is no obligation to do any of that. It's just disclose if you know it or tell us if you don't. Remember, there is no option of no representation on that one, though. They cannot say, I'm not telling you. They have to disclose. The other thing is, if a buyer wants it, they have to be given how long if they want it to evaluate the property?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is it 3 days?
If the buyer wants that period of time, I don't know. If the buyer wants a period of time, how long must they be given to test and evaluate the property if they elect to take that time?
10 days?
10 days. They get 10 days to investigate the property if they are so inclined, but they have every right to waive that 10 days. They don't have to do it. Okay, they don't have to. Now, folks, that being said, go take a break. Come back at 8:40. Keep on rocking and rolling. Whoop, whoop.
My head's going to explode.
I know, but it's helping you whether you like it or not.
Seth, are we gonna? Is this section where we're gonna talk about subdivisions, or is that later?
Like subdivision regulations?
Yeah, like when you kind of have to, like closing on a lot, or you know what I'm talking about?
That was technically the last section, so I'll circle back around to that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So let's pick back up. Now I'm going to circle back around really quick because Kirsten asked a question about the subdivision regulations. Folks, first and foremost, that's really in like the public land use control section. But what really is testable for that is, number one, do not get confused between subdivision regulations and subdivision protective covenants. Okay? Subdivision regulations, public land use control. Subdivision protective covenants, also called restrictive covenants, private land use control. When we're dealing with subdivision regulations, the most testable things, hands down, is that the definition of a subdivision is when you divide a piece of land into at least 2 or more lots with the intent to build, develop, or sell. And so it's very easy to meet that criteria. And if you meet that criteria, you have to get approval from the planning board to do this. Now, if you are dividing the lots for your own personal usage, you do not need their permission. If you're not creating more than 2 lots with the intention to develop, build, or sell, and if you're not creating a new road, then you don't need their permission. But anytime you're creating a new road, you're dividing it into 2 or more lots with the intention to build, develop, or sell, it classifies as a subdivision. So what has to happen is you have to go to the government, the planning board, whatever you want to call them, and you have to say, here's what I'd like to do. And you have to go through an approval process. And there's typically an open public hearing where they can come, neighboring people can come and speak their piece if they want to. And once they approve it, that is what we call preliminary plat approval. They say, yep, your plan looks good, we will okay it. Well, folks, once they okay it is when they can actually start developing it. Well, once you've got this preliminary plat approval, they can start marketing the lots for sale. And they can even contract on the lots. The kicker, though, is you cannot close on a lot, meaning transfer the ownership of the lot to anybody else until the final plat map has been recorded. Meaning we've finished it, it's developed, and we have recorded the final map in case anything changed. The final map has been recorded with the Register of Deeds office. And so the other thing to be aware of is if you contract before the final plat's recorded and there is a material change compared to what you contracted, you are allowed to get out with no penalties. That's the biggest thing. Helpful?
Yeah, thank you. I was getting confused about closing and contract to purchase, so that clarified that.
Yeah. Let me go, folks, at this point, over some of the more difficult earlier topics really briefly. And then we're probably going to spend the rest of the time in like agency, brokerage, and contracts because like we got to talk about those, okay? Let me just remind you about the freehold versus non-freehold estates. You just had a recap on non-freehold in the landlord, tenant, and property management section, okay? Estate for years, periodic tenancy, estate at will, and estate at sufferance. So hopefully you're good on those. When we're dealing with the freehold estates, those are estates for ownership. And remember, they can be fee simple absolute. But then when we're dealing with anything less than fee simple absolute, there are sometimes we are restricting how long you're going to own it, and sometimes we're restricting on what you can do with the property. And so remember the different things that came into this. When we say fee simple on the test, it means fee simple absolute. Highest and best form of ownership. You can do whatever you want within the scope of the law, meaning you still have to follow public and private land use controls, but nobody's restricting anything else. There is no restrictions that could ever cost you your ownership in that regard. But then we had the fee simple defeasible, also called what?
Fee simple conditional and fee simple subsequent.
That is one of the ones within defeasible, but the broad category has another name.
Absolute.
Qualified?
Qualified fee. Qualified fee. Folks, here you go. Look right here. Defeasible fee, also called qualified fee estates. Remember, they have the root word in them. You have to qualify for your ownership. Or in other words, you could defeat your own ownership. These are so weird that if you don't follow rules, you could defeat your ownership. And so the two categories within fee simple determinable, also called qualified fee, were fee simple. If I said that, I think I might have gotten confused. Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm like, did I just say what I think I just said? Because I was reading Olivia's comment. The defeasible, also called qualified fee, have two subcategories, okay? Fee simple determinable, meaning we have determined the one allowable use. This is the only thing you can do. And what happens if you stop doing that under fee simple determinable?
You lose ownership.
You don't own it anymore. Say it again, Rob. Where does it go?
Reverts back.
Reverts back to?
The owner on
the grantor.
You can't say, yeah, original owner. You can't say owner anymore because we're not the owner anymore. But the grantor, right? That's exactly right. The grantor or the grantor's heirs. Automatic reversion if you screw this up, okay? Do this one thing. If you don't do this one thing, automatic reversion if you screw it up. The other one was the one Josh was telling us about. Fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. Okay, it is a very big mouthful. It's also sometimes called conditional fee or fee simple conditional. And that is do whatever you want so long as what?
You don't do this one thing.
You don't do this one thing. And if you do this one thing you're not supposed to do, what happens? Not automatically.
You're right. It has to be filed within a certain amount of time through the court system.
Court systems. The grantor or the grantor's heirs could regain ownership by way of taking you to court. It's not automatic reversion, but they could get it back. Okay? Now, then we had the life estates. What were the life estates?
Per ultra V.
There you go. Conventional and per ultra V. What makes a conventional life estate a conventional life estate?
There's only one measuring life and it's not inhabitable.
I was going to say the life.
Or sorry, not inheritable.
There's only one measuring life in both of them, so I need you to be a little more specific. Not inheritable is correct.
You're a
The
life
and a measuring life are the same in a conventional.
There you go. Yeah. The life tenant and the measuring life are the same person in conventional. Cheyenne, you own this so long as you are alive. Okay, that is a conventional life estate. The life tenant, meaning the person who owns it, is also the measuring life. And so then, when Cheyenne dies, what happens to her ownership?
It ends.
It ends. Well, that's the default. The default. Well, there you go. There you go. Folks, we've got two options. If we don't name a remainder man, it will revert back to the grantor or the grantor's heirs. I give this property to Cheyenne. Cheyenne, you own this so long as you are alive. That's a conventional life estate, and that's all I say. When Cheyenne dies, I get it back. And if I'm dead, my kids get it, okay? Automatic reversion back to the grantor or the grantor's heirs. That's the default. But the other option is, as y'all just told me, we could name a remainder man. Cheyenne, you own it so long as you are alive, and when you die, Shia gets it. So Shia is the remainder man or woman, as it were. So if I asked you while Cheyenne is alive to tell me, what does Shia have, what would you tell me?
Conventional lifestyle.
Shia does not. If Cheyenne is still alive, and I name Shia as the remainder man, what does Shia currently have?
The option V. Ownership?
Nothing.
I mean, she technically doesn't have any relationship to it, so.
Well, hold on. Relationships are very...
I mean, yeah.
Can we all agree that if she is set to get it when Cheyenne dies, she does have a relationship to it? It's got a name. It's called an estate in remainder. An estate in remainder. She may not own it now, but she will own it if Cheyenne dies before her. Okay? So the other one, the life estate per ultra V, what does that translate to?
Life of another.
For the life of another. And so what makes a per ultra V a per ultra V?
To own it as long as this person is alive.
Right. So use the technical terms.
The life tenant and measuring life are different people.
Nailed it. The life tenant and the measuring life are different people. McKinney, you own this so long as Katie is alive. Okay? They're different people. That is what makes it this. Now, folks, let me remind you. Okay? This one is arguably in the state of inheritance, meaning it can be willed. Why? Because if I say, McKinney, you own it so long as Katie is alive, and McKinney kicks the bucket, it's technically still McKinney's to own. Because Katie, the measuring life, is still alive. So she could will it. And whoever she wills it to would own it how long?
As long as Katie's alive.
As long as Katie's alive. Well, what, McKinney, would happen if you willed it to Katie? Katie would have a what? Conventional life estate. Because now Katie is the measuring life and the life tenant. Folks, of all the freehold estates, remember, every single one of them is an estate of inheritance except which one? The conventional life estate. The conventional life estate is the only one that is not in a state of inheritance. Now, just remember the other thing about the inheritance piece, folks. You can only give what you have. So if Constantine owns a property, fee simple determinable, that he can only use as a horse farm, and he dies and leaves it to his best friend can only use it as what?
A horse farm.
A horse farm. There you go. Other quick reminder about the concurrent ownership versus and severalty. Folks, severalty means one owner, could be one entity, one person. Concurrent, you've got tenancy in common, joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety. Tenancy in common for anybody. Joint tenancy for anybody. Tenancy by the entirety is only for who?
Married couples.
Married couples only, and they have to be married when? Before they purchase the property, okay? Getting married after will create a marital interest, but never tenancy by the entirety, okay? Remember the other unique things. Tenancy in common, you can always will your share. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship is the default in joint tenancy. Having that right of survivorship is the default on the national portion. But be careful on the North Carolina test. I probably will, or they will, ask you what language is required to create joint tenancy with right of survivorship. And in North Carolina, we have to specifically say on the deed, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. If that language is not there, we would basically interpret it as tenancy in common. Okay, it has to have that language with right of survivorship on the deed. Now remember, the unique thing about joint tenancy, if you're on the national portion, always default to the right of survivorship. And for most North Carolina questions, default to it too, but just be careful if they ask about that language. Joint tenancy has a right of survivorship. That means if one of the owners dies, what happens to their share?
Goes to the other owner.
Gets absorbed by the other owners. That's exactly right. So you cannot will joint tenancy ownership. Remember though, in your life, you can sell it. What happens if you sell it?
Become a tenant in
The
common.
new owner becomes the tenancy. Yeah, what you just said.
Yep, because it would lack the unity of time, title, possession, and interest. So they would come in as a tenant in common, and they would sit on their own little island with their ownership, while the rest of you played the joint tenancy King of the Mountain game. Okay? And remember, in tenancy by the entirety, folks, if I asked you which of these cannot be held by a brother and sister?
By the entirety.
Tenancy by the entirety, because in every state, even Alabama and West Virginia, it's illegal to marry your sibling. Okay? Cousins, fair game. Siblings, absolutely not. Stop it. So that is, can't do it. Also be aware that tenancy by the entirety, always equal shares, not severable, okay? Automatic right of survivorship. The only way you can end it, divorce, mutual agreement, death. Folks, what in North Carolina, what was the rule I need you to remember for condominiums? I'm sorry, timeshares. Not condominiums, timeshares. Let's talk about that one. That's more important.
What, you can back out of it 5 days?
Wait, yeah, what was the total rule?
500.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, the 5-5-5 rule. Okay, the definition of a timeshare: 5 or more periods over at least 5 years, folks. That's important because if it's 10 periods over 10 years, it's a timeshare. Okay, if it's 6 periods over 6 years, it's a timeshare. As long as it's at least 5 or more periods over at least 5 years, it is considered a timeshare, and as such falls under the jurisdiction of the North Carolina Timeshare Act. 5-day rescission period on the purchase of all timeshares is the next one. $500 fines imposed by the Real Estate Commission to any timeshare developers who violate the North Carolina Timeshare Act with no maximum. And then, of course, the 5 and 5, the first two 5s combined together is 10 days for escrows monies that they have to remain in escrow. Now, I will warn you about one other thing. What was I going to say? I'll think about it. I don't remember what it was. Oh, do you have to have a license as a timeshare developer in North Carolina?
No.
It's a firm license, right?
No, it was on a firm license.
But you have to hire, it's like a specialized realtor that manages the team. I can't
They
remember.
have a license. All the developers usually sell the timeshares, and they don't need a license.
Entity?
No, let me help you out. The timeshare developer does not need a license. The timeshare developer is just the person who comes up with the rules and divides the property. They do not need a license. They just have to follow the Timeshare Act. However, anybody selling timeshares in North Carolina would have to have a broker's license. So if they wanted to sell them themselves, they would need a broker's license. So what they typically do is they hire a project broker, is the word you were looking for, Josh. A project broker. Yeah, project broker. So the person selling the timeshares does have to be licensed. What you got, McKinney?
I got this one wrong. What can you explain the horizontal property acts of condominiums? It just made me think.
Yeah, that one's a stupid question, but yeah, basically because of the nature of things like condominiums and co-ops, there is a special set of rules called horizontal property rules or property laws, basically just saying that you can't do anything that would destroy the well-being or integrity of your neighboring person's property, being extra cautious with, how you maintain the dwelling and not wasting it and debris and setting fire, things of that nature. The reason it comes into that, and you don't need to know any specifics of it. You just need to know, like, what do horizontal property laws pertain to? Properties that are touching each other. Basically what it is, condos and co-ops.
Because they're not encompassed by the same building. I just didn't understand why there was a difference between the two of them.
Yeah, because they are individually owned. Townhomes are individually owned, and you own your entire structure. And as such, the only thing you share is the party wall. The reason is because you are all under the same building, owned by the same entity, and that's basically what it comes down to. Like, I wouldn't...
Because like with a townhome, you owe all the way to the land, and with a condo, you don't.
That's right. I mean, there's no land ownership for the individual property owners except as that tenants in common. So yeah, that horizontal property laws is weird. But the only thing that they should ever ask you about it is, what types of properties are subject to this? Co-ops and condos. That's it. Yeah.
You said that was a stupid question. I thought you were saying my question.
No, McKinney, no. God, I'm so sorry. No. That is a dumb question in the online program, not you asking. That's a good question for you to ask because I'll be honest with you, we don't really talk about horizontal property laws that often in North Carolina. It's more of a national thing, and we have plenty of condos. Sorry about that. No. Listen, okay. You've been hanging out with me for 80 hours. Not once I've ever called a question stupid, okay? I mean, not from y'all's point of view. In the program, yes.
Hey, Seth, is the earth flat?
That's an excellent question, Constantine. The answer is you're drunk. Go home. So let's get into the agency section, folks. I mean, of course, even with 4 hours, you know, I mean, we can barely scratch the surface. Think about it. We've been in here for 80 hours, and I could still be teaching you for another 3 years, right? 3 years. Not really, that's an exaggeration. But let's make sure that you know a couple of, you know, very important pieces here. Remember when we're dealing with, well, basic contract law, of course, understanding those words, valid, void, voidable. Remember, those pertain to deeds and contracts. Make sure you know the difference. Deed is transferring ownership. Contract is a preemptive agreement to potentially transfer a deed when we're dealing with sales contracts. And remember, there are certain things that can make both contracts, and I said deeds, valid, void, voidable. But I do want to focus more on the agency section. I'll circle back around. Folks, if I was to ask you, okay, and I'm going to help you out here. If I was to ask you which laws dictate how we operate as real estate professionals or real estate licensees, folks, it's all of these. The common law of agency, where we taught you those fiduciary duties, old car, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable skill and care. Basic contract law, because we work with contracts every single day. And of course, our state license laws and commission rules. Every state has their own jurisdictional authority. So all the laws and rules regulating and governing brokerage relationships, all of them. So remember, if I am giving you a test question and I say agent, where does your mind need to default?
The firm.
The firm. And every licensee who works for that firm is considered a what?
Sub-agent.
A sub-agent of that firm. Okay? The people who hire the agent to represent them is called the what?
Listing.
Either the principal or the client.
Principal or the client. I didn't specifically say buyer or seller, so principal or client is the person who hires us to represent them and look after their best interests. And everybody else is called what?
A customer.
A customer. Now, folks, that word, those words are imperative for you to pay attention to on the test. If I tell you that Caleb is assisting a buyer customer without saying anything else, in North Carolina, who is Caleb working for?
Seller.
The seller. In some way, shape, or form, he's working for the seller. He could be the direct listing agent firm and a sub-agent of that firm. He could be a seller sub-agent. But one thing is certain. If I say he's assisting a buyer customer, he does not work for that buyer, does he?
No.
Otherwise, I would have called that person a what?
A client.
A client. These words are critically important. And so understanding these will help you out on the test. Now, remember, too, we owe fiduciary brokerage in North Carolina, but because it's a national concept, you could see the terms facilitator or transactional broker. That is where you are representing neither party. You have no loyalties to anybody. You are just facilitating it, making the transaction go forward. North Carolina doesn't recognize this. However, you could see it on North Carolina test because it could say, which of the following is not a brokerage practice available in North Carolina, or which is not a lawful representation in North Carolina. On a national test, is it legal? Sure. So we practice fiduciary brokerage only. Remember the tiers of authority, folks. A universal agent, unlimited powers. They can do anything and everything on behalf of a person. Okay? Pull the plug, open a business, spend your money, whatever you want. Universal agent typically is an unlimited power of attorney. Very common with military spouses overseas. General agent, give me 2 examples that we talked about when you were acting as a general agent.
Property manager.
Property manager.
The employee of the firm.
There you go. The independent contractor agreement you sign as a affiliated licensee. Because a general agent has the authority to bind you to some things. So when you are working for your firm, who is signing the listing agreement between the client and the firm?
You.
We are. And so we are able to bind our firm to that listing agreement. Okay? Same thing with property management agreements. They typically have the authority to sign leases on behalf of the owner. So they are able to bind them to some things, but not all things. And then when you are working, well, you tell me, when are you a special agent?
Whenever you're hired by a seller or buyer.
There you go. buyers and sellers, folks, because we can't make decisions for our people. We say, you got an offer for this much, and we give them some advice. Who makes the ultimate decision?
They do.
They do. Okay, we do not have the authority to bind them to anything as a special agent. That is us working with buyers and sellers. Now, of course, I've told you a million times, you've got to be very careful about the relationships and the agreements and what the agreements do. Folks, I'm going to say this, and I want you to listen right now. And if any of you get this wrong, you're dead to me, meaning on the test, because I'm giving you a hint here. If I say the document that outlines the relationship between a brokerage firm and a buyer and discusses the type of property the buyer is interested in purchasing and the amount of money the firm intends to make, what type of agency agreement am I referring to?
Can you say the question one more time?
No.
Okay.
I would read it twice.
You should read it twice. The document that outlines the... That was a lot of words, man. You're right, Zach. The document that outlines the relationship between a buyer and a firm discusses the type of property a buyer is interested in buying and the amount of money a firm intends to make.
The buyer contract?
Just be the buyer agency agreement.
Buyer agency agreement. Folks, a couple key words in there should have given that away. But the reason I'm telling you this, I can't tell you. Listen to this. This is terrible. I can't tell you how often students will pick listing agreement on the test. Folks, listing agreement is a relationship between who?
Seller and agent.
Seller and the firm. So if we're talking about a buyer, it's a buyer agency agreement. The other thing that people mess up on is I start talking about a listing agreement. And one of the options is, what does a listing agreement do? And one of the choices is typically talks about how we're going to work with the seller and the buyer. Folks, why on God's green earth would we be talking about the buyer on a listing agreement? That's not the answer. Does that make sense? Anna Grace, I love the vote of confidence. That was a lot of words. I'm just trying to emphasize a point here, right? You've got to be careful in what it's saying. If you just pay attention, sometimes people shut their brains off because they're so nervous about the test and they let common sense leave. Yes, some of these questions are tricky, but don't turn off your common sense radar because some of them are common sense. The biggest, folks, I'll tell you a crazy story and then we'll keep going here. I had another instructor who used to teach a cram course to help people, pass the exam. And she told a story about a student who came to her class, still couldn't pass. Came to her class, still couldn't pass. Like kept going and going and going and still couldn't pass. And she really started to whittle down. She was worried. She's like, maybe this guy's just brain dead. Like maybe he just can't pass this test. Come to find out, this man was over analyzing. Because she would give him an example question. And he's like, well, that can't be it because that's too obvious. She's like, that is it. Are you doing this on the test? He's like, yeah. They're not all designed to be malicious and terrible. Sometimes it is okay for them to be stupid easy. So just keep that in mind when you take it, okay? Like don't get so caught up that you think every single one of them is trying to trick you. Especially after we went through some of the practice ones. Yes, there was a lot of tricky ones in the class because I need you to pay attention to specific words. But they're not all designed to trick you. Just take your time and pick the best answer. Sometimes people overanalyze it and they shoot themselves in the foot. No, that's just too obvious. It can't be a listing agreement. Why would they ask us about a relationship agreement between a seller and a firm? It can't be a listing agreement. It is. Pick it. Gotta be careful. So, hopefully you understand all these agreements, folks. Remember when we are dealing with agency, okay? Don't forget this. There are firms that work with just buyers, and as such, they would only ever have single agency. There are firms that only work with sellers. As such, they would only have single agency. There is never a conflict of interest in firms like that. And so let me ask you this. If I have a firm that only works with sellers, could they ever be assisting a buyer?
No. Oh, God.
With designated dual agency, yes.
Don't say designated. No, dual agency isn't possible. Folks, listen. In a firm that only works with sellers, is dual agency possible?
No.
No, because what is the definition of dual agency?
You're representing both the buyer and the seller. Can I take back my answer? You can show property to the buyer, but you have to tell them that you're representing.
Oh, you mean you can assist a buyer? Because showing property is assisting. I didn't say work for. So I'll ask the question again. If we are dealing with a firm that only works with sellers, could anybody in that firm ever be assisting a buyer?
Yes.
Absolutely. Every single one of them could at some point be assisting a buyer, but that buyer would be what?
Customer.
Customer, aka unrepresented. Careful. Okay? Careful. There's a big difference between working for and assisting. Remember Best Buy. When you walk into Best Buy, they want to assist you in buying technology, but who do they work for?
Best Buy.
Best Buy. Best Buy. So sometimes we assist people to get the deal to go to closing. Folks, what is your job as a listing agent?
The property show.
Yeah, let's make it even more simple. Sell the freaking house. And if we don't have buyers, how can we sell the house? So let me ask you another question. Josh, you're a listing agent. I call you as an unrepresented buyer. And I say, Josh, will you show me this house? Are you going to show it to me?
Yes.
Well, we have to first.
Sure, but I don't care about that. Are you going to show it to me?
Yeah.
Sure. Why? Why are you going to show it to me?
I have no reason not to.
Well, you have no reason not to, but you have a very big reason too. Josh, if you don't get paid unless you sell the freaking house, don't you want to show me that house? You see what I'm saying? You don't make a dime. But listen, I understand you have no reason not to, but if you want to get paid, you better sell that house, man. All right? So yes, you're going to have to go over the working with real estate agents disclosure. Yes, you're going to have to explain that to me, because if you're showing a property to somebody, what is going to occur?
There's going to be potential confidentiality or
there you go.
Contact.
And so in North Carolina, if you are showing a property to a one-off person, first substantial contact is happening. You better have already given them the working with real estate agents disclosure before you show a property. Okay? And also in North Carolina, understand that you can't show a property unless you represent somebody. Who are your options to represent in North Carolina?
Buyer or seller?
Buyer or seller.
And then landlord and tenant.
Well, before we even go to landlord and tenant, take it a step further. Buyer, seller.
Firm.
Both. You can represent both. You can either work for the buyer or the seller, or you can work for the buyer and the seller. You can represent both in dual agency. Don't forget about that. Your options are represent only the buyer and you don't care about the seller. Or you can represent only the seller, you don't care about the buyer. Or you can represent both and you care about everybody. Now tell me about dual agency. If you are a dual agent, what you gonna do?
Basically nothing.
Basically nothing. Shut your mouth. Okay? M-O-U-F. Your mouth. Shut it. Can't say nothing about nothing to nobody. Well, more specifically, you can't say nothing about nothing to your clients, but who arguably could gossip back and forth about the buyers and the sellers' secrets?
Other sub-agents of that firm.
The entire brokerage firm could gossip and know the secrets. Why? Because we can't use them. Where's the harm in that? Dual agency, you are bound and gagged and worthless. No helping, no hurting, no advice, no nothing. What would you like to do? What would you like to do? What would you like to do? Now, remember, it acts a lot like transactional brokerage when we're in dual agency. But don't ever call it that. Transactional brokerage is we represent nobody, so we're worthless. In dual agency, we represent everybody, so we're worthless. And remember, you cannot do dual agency without informed and written consent, okay? And also, please be aware that the only legal way to do it is it's called disclosed dual. Now, don't get confused if they just call it dual. But I'm telling you, Don't you ever default to designated. When you see dual on the test, or if you say ABC Realty and ABC Realty, you start with that worthless one. But if I say designated, what has changed now?
Now there's only
one firm, but
one subagent for each party, so one representing the buyer and seller.
And arguably it could be more than one, right? But at the end of the day, we have designated people to say, you go for blood for the buyer, you go for blood for the seller. And so there you go, Matt, go for blood. And it is still a type of dual. So don't ever call it exclusive. If that's the question, the answer is no, it's not exclusive. But does it act like exclusive? Yes. Because that one licensee is exclusively representing this one. But the firm is not exclusive. The firm is still sitting in dual, okay? Because it is a type of dual. Everybody okay? Now, the other thing that some of you have a tendency to get confused on, remember seller subagency, okay? Remember, two brokerage firms can cooperate and still do seller subagency. So ABC Realty could have the listing, and XYZ Realty could bring them a buyer, and it is possible for XYZ to also be representing ABC's seller because of cooperating seller subagency. So if I said Anna Grace, I'm just going to call you AG, works for ABC Realty, she has a listing, and she gives me permission in the multiple listing service. That's where she'd put it. In the MLS, she would say 3% commission to a buyer's agent or 3% commission to a seller subagent. And so when Leighton calls me up, and I work for XYZ Realty, and he says, Seth, I want to see 123 Main Street, which is Anna Grace's listing. I'm going to look in the MLS, and it's going to say seller subagency okay, buyer agency okay. When I meet Leighton, I'm going to say, Leighton, here's how the working with real estate agents disclosure works. And I'd love to be your buyer's agent. Leighton tells me to go to hell. So if I show Leighton the property, I'm acting as what if he wouldn't hire me to be his buyer's agent?
seller subagent.
Seller subagent, which means my loyalties are with who?
ABC.
The seller, ABC, Anna Grace, all the above. So if Leighton asks me for advice, I'm going to tell him what?
Go to it.
Go to hell. He told me to go to hell. I'm going to tell him to go to hell. I said, I just pulled the Uno reverse card, Leighton. You go to hell. Don't you ask me for advice. Okay? So understand, assisting does not mean representing. Okay? Assisting does not mean representing. And so that is seller subagency. Now remember, could you switch from a seller subagent to a buyer's agent? Yes.
Yes.
But it is very ill-advised. What would I have to do? I would, number one, have to get permission from the seller, Anna Grace's seller, okay? And I'd also have to explain to Leighton, I'm like, man, the damage has been done. I already shared your secrets. You should have done this before. But can you switch from a seller subagent to a buyer's agent? Yes, as long as all parties consent and you tell them why it's not a good idea all the time, sure. No problem. Now, the first substantial contact piece, folks, what is constituted for agency disclosure? What constitutes first substantial contact?
Confidential information.
Any confidential information. If the conversation moves to confidential information, okay, price, terms, motivation, anything we could use against them in a negotiation. Now, folks, I'm going to ask you a question. Is the working with real estate agents disclosure required at first substantial contact in all transactions?
No, only sales transactions.
Thank you so much. Sales transactions only. Folks, if you were reading on the test and I ask you which the following types of transactions does the working with real estate agents disclosure apply to, I promise you there's going to be an option for all transactions and there's going to be an option for all sales transactions. If you pick all transactions, you are getting it wrong, slick. It is required in sales transactions only, both residential and commercial. Everybody okay with that statement? Do not say all. The other thing is, remember, outside of that requirement, there is a specific instance where we would have to disclose our agency status at initial contact. When is that?
When a buyer's agent contacts a seller's agent.
Or a...
Seller agent.
No, he already said seller's agent.
Buyer.
Right. So,
Or vice versa, right?
No, not vice versa. It is always only when a buyer's agent contacts somebody, buyer's agent contacts a seller agent or
firm.
Seller.
the seller directly. Seller directly. Rob, you started off so strong, and then you're like, buyer, Abraham Lincoln.
I said seller. You probably didn't hear me.
Oh, did you?
You say it straight from the beginning.
Say what? No, well, he said seller's agent is what I heard first, unless that was somebody else. Either way, seller or seller's agent, folks, very specifically. Okay? Seller or seller. If you are a buyer's agent, meaning your loyalties are with whom? Buyer. And you are contacting a seller or a seller's agent, you would have to disclose agency at initial contact. Okay?
So I had a question on that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the few interactions I've had with real estate, like, I always went through my agent to contact the seller or the seller's agent. I never actually, like, don't remember my agent talking to the seller directly. Is that normal? I mean,
here's the thing. Have you, because you're forgetting a very big piece, Rob, have you ever purchased a for sale by owner?
No.
Does a for sale by owner have an agent?
No.
So who is the only person we can contact?
All right.
There you go. The seller.
Right.
Yeah, the seller.
But if it's not for sale by owner.
Sure, yeah. We typically do not reach out to the seller directly. We go through agent. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly right. There was something else I wanted to throw in the mix. What was it? Y'all are crushing it, though. I'm very happy.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about, and this is just for me, maybe the provisional broker, when they, never mind. I think I answered my own question in my head.
Okay. I feel like there's something that's about to trigger something. Let me, because sometimes it gets tricky on the test, and I don't remember if it's on mine or if it's just something that could come up. Folks, understand, and I think maybe the online program has some questions like this. Remember your fiduciary duties. Technically, when our relationship ends, you turn back into a customer. But remember the cautionary tale. If there's nobody else to assist, if you learn confidential information about somebody who's your client, and then your relationship ends, we would never go out of our way to hurt that person. We will continue that confidentiality unless our loyalties change. If we get hired by somebody else and they are now our client and that information behooves them, then we would share that confidential information. Okay, remember, you owe customer confidential information to a client, but you would never share client confidential information with a customer. And of course, in the scenario of you know information about a customer that was formerly a client and it could help another customer, we wouldn't share it. We're not sharing information between customers. The only time that we owe disclosure of customer confidential information is for a client. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I was really just about to ask about that because I remember that being one of the questions that I actually asked you about.
Yeah.
Because it said the listing expired. Did they violate any fiduciary duties? And the answer was yes, they did. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That is one that just came to mind. I mean, of course, you know there's like so much things. So I'm just trying to think of like the most testable, troublesome topics for everybody. Anything else y'all want to throw at me while I'm looking? What you got, Fabiola?
So a listing agreement, can that be verbal or no?
No. They have to be in writing from the offset in North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah. All agency agreements have to be in writing from the offset in North Carolina with the exception of the oral buyer agency agreement. And that one is always two things. Remember the oral buyer agency agreement, always two things, at least what are they?
Expressed.
Well, whenever y'all throw that one in, it's always, that makes the third thing. Express means clearly stated, so we have to talk terms, right? How much we intend to make, how it's going to work, if dual agency is going to be allowed, but what other two things aside from express?
Written. In writing?
No, not in writing, because it starts out as oral, so it's okay for it to be starting off at oral. It will eventually go to writing, but that's not the two things it has to be. It's, what did you say, Josh?
Implied.
Nope, not implied. Implied, it's the opposite. It's got to be expressed. Folks, this is very testable. If I say, which of the following is true of oral buyer agency, if one of the answer choices is, we have to talk the terms and how much we intend to make and whether or not we can practice dual agency, that is true. Because they have to be expressed. Express meaning state the terms. We're never just going to get in a car and see each other, go see the pretty houses. Oral buyer agency agreements in North Carolina have to be expressed, clearly stated. But remember, there's two things that they also always are.
Legally binding? Well,
you're asking us what the other two types of agency.
No, I'm not asking that.
Oh, you're not asking.
Are you asking like what are the two types of expressments? Oh.
Open-ended and non-exclusive. They cannot have an expiration date or a period of time that you're binding people to them. And they cannot bind you from working with other people. Kirsten and I enter into an oral buyer agency agreement. Can I stop Kirsten from working with other oral buyer agents?
No.
No. Non-exclusive. Remember, oral buyer agency agreements are like dating. Let's feel each other out. I can't put an offer in for you, but let's see if we vibe together. You can cancel anytime. Okay? Non-exclusive and open-ended. No period of time. Okay? And cannot bind you to work with only me. If I wanted to say, Kirsten, you can't work with anybody but me, what is the only way I can do that?
Buyer agency.
A written exclusive buyer agency agreement. Because remember, there is also a written non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. Both exist. But if I wanted to say you can't work with nobody else, remember that word exclusive. Just me, Kirsten, can't have nobody else. We would have to sign a written buyer agency agreement. Ringing a bell? What else, folks? What do y'all want to ask?
Wait, so I actually want to ask, can we go back to that previous question? So I just want to make sure, so you're telling us that agency agreements, that's what it is, agency agreements are open-ended and non-exclusive.
Oral buyer agency agreements have to be expressed, meaning clearly stated, talking the terms. Are we going to practice dual agency? Or how are we going to be compensated? When does that have to be reduced to writing? So they have to be expressed, clearly stated. And they are always open-ended for no specific period of time. They're just going until they're not. And they are always non-exclusive. You cannot bind anybody to work with you and only you in an oral buyer agency agreement. They can work with as many people as they want to. So let me give you the example of the question. Remember, Dania hires me by way of an oral buyer agency agreement, and we talk about agency and compensation. And I show her 14 homes, and finally on the 14th one, she loves it. And she says she wants to submit an offer. But then she leaves me, and she goes and she uses her best friend, who she realizes is also a real estate agent, to put in the offer. Do I have any recourse?
No.
No. Because I did not have the ability to bind her to me. She is welcome to leave me high and dry, just like dating. Remember, I told you, it's like dating. Can't you just ghost somebody and there's nothing they can do about it? Block, delete, whatever, sure. What else y'all need me to answer for you? I know, we could just go forever, but was this helpful thus far? Nice little recap of information.
Nice.
Without a doubt.
Good.
Yeah, man, definitely helpful.
Good deal. And the beautiful thing is you still have a week to study. Yay, you.
Amen.
Even though I'm talking like we're about to all just, fall off a cliff or something like that, you still got an entire week to ask me questions, an entire week to study. I'll try to get this video up tomorrow, like I said. All the other videos are still online. You've got the world as your oyster. There is no reason that any of you should not pass that test next week.